All right, welcome everyone in the council chambers and on calling in online or watching online. We'll get this meeting started December the 6th for the Committee of the Whole. I will now call this Committee of the Whole meeting to order. Approval of the agenda. The agenda be read as to be approved amending to move 9.2.2 to after presentation from Grace Sauble. I need a mover and a seconder to do that. Councilor Winters, Councilor Day, discussion. Seeing no discussion, I'm going to turn the one way tonight. It's good. No discussion. I'll call the vote. All those in favor. All right, that is carried. The land acknowledgement statement. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge with respect the history, spirituality, and culture of the Shinnebec, the people of the three bars known as the Ojibwe, Odawa, and the Potawatomi Nation, who have inhabited this land from time immemorial, and further give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, now known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. We also recognize the Métis and Inuit whose ancestors shared these lands and these waters. May we all, as treaty people, live with respect on this land and live in peace and friendship with all its diverse peoples. Moving on to the declaration of pecuniary interest. Anyone have declaration of pecuniary interest to declare? You can declare now or at any time during the meeting. Announcements. Does any member wish to make an announcement? Councilor Day.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a brief announcement to acknowledge National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. It was on this day several decades ago that women were killed in Montreal at Laval University. I always now like to think of missing and murdered Indigenous women on this day as well, and all gender-based violence. Violence has a deep and clear impact on victims and their communities, and the fear of violence also affects many people on a much more daily basis. So as we make decisions tonight, that's maybe a great thing to keep in the back of our mind. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Day. Mayor Carlton.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I would just like to commend staff and everyone that was involved last Friday night out at Shallow Lake with the tree lighting and the choirs that were there and everybody that took part. I have heard on the radio this week from Steve Ritchie, who plays hockey out there on Monday nights, what a fantastic sight he thinks it is. So that is spreading through everybody. And the other thing is just a reminder that Monday afternoon, 2 o'clock, is the non-motorized parade at Kemble, and I will be there walking with Keith Davidson with my chain of office on. So I hope to see you all there.
Well, thank you for that. And just to kind of piggy off of what Councillor Day had mentioned here too, I had gotten a written script here too for today, so I will read it. It's on my agenda, so I'm going to read it also. So today is National Day of Action on Violence Against Women. It is a day dedicated to remembering those who have experienced gender-based violence and those who have lost to it. In Georgian Bluffs, caring for our neighbors is at the heart of who we are. When one of us faces violence, it affects all of us. We need to ensure every woman feels safe in our community. That means being there for each other, offering support, and taking action. We all play a role in creating an environment where women feel safe and where their voices are heard and respected. We must strive towards a culture of respect, empathy, and support of those who have suffered and those who continue to endure. I urge everyone today to stand in solidarity, to raise awareness, and take a meaningful action for the future free from violence against women. Together, our actions can make a difference. All right, on to public hearings. We have nil. Delegation public question period 7.1. Items on the agenda. Any person who wishes to appear before council regarding an item on the agenda shall make a written application to the clerk by 3 p.m. the day of the meeting. To register, www.georgianbluffs.ca/delegations or call the clerk's office at 519-376-2729, extension 603. We do have a delegation with us tonight from Food Recycler, Farah Sharifton. You're welcome to Georgian Bluffs, and you have 5 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. I will be presenting the Food Cycler pilot program results for Georgian Bluffs. I'm going to share my screen, so bear with me one moment as I get that up for you. Right. Of course, it'll take a second. All right, perfect. Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can.
Great. So like I said, my name is Farah. I am the Municipal Programs Coordinator with Food Cycle Science, and I'm here to present the pilot program results for Georgian Bluffs. And before we launch into the results, I wanted to quickly go over who we are. Food Cycle Science is a Canadian company based out of Ottawa. We're 100% focused on food waste diversion solutions through our innovative technology called a food cycler. 2022 and 2023 have been really big years for us. We were selected as finalists in Impact Canada's Food Waste Reduction Challenge. And we'd like to acknowledge that your municipality's Food Cycler program was made possible in part due to the federal funding from this program. And as of today, we're really proud to say that the Food Cycler is the trusted food waste solution for over 100 municipal partners within Canada and in the United States. And when Georgian Bluffs joined, you were the 88th municipality to pilot the solution, and we want to thank you for your willingness to trial an innovative solution to the longstanding problem that is food waste. And so with support from Impact Canada's Food Waste Reduction Challenge, your pilot program was run that included 100 participating households. The net cost to the municipality was $10,000 plus shipping and HST. And your pilot ran from July to September of this year, where usage was tracked for 12 weeks to calculate total waste diversion. And participants completed a survey to provide data and feedback that we will be going over now. So we were able to collect 82 responses out of your 100 participating households, which is an 82% completion rate, which is really great. And you'll see that the first two questions here really just give you an idea to get a sense of how important the reduction of greenhouse gases and waste is within your community. For both fronts, it was rated a 9 out of 10 in terms of importance. And when we asked your residents where their food waste went prior to using their food cycler, a large number indicated that it was some of their food waste was going into their garbage, and a smaller number indicated that they composted all year, whereas for others, this was really only possible during the summer months. And when we asked residents why they didn't compost, a large number chose not to because of animals and pests like bears and raccoons, and a significant number as well reported concerns about odors, maintenance, and space. These answers are very much in line with a lot of the data that we've collected from our municipal programs, and the Food Cycler really is a great solution for these issues because it's easy to use, it's odor-free, and the byproduct really does prevent wildlife encounters. So when we look at the split of the devices in Georgian Bluffs, you had about a 60-40 split between the FC30 and the Maestro or the Eco 5. And based on the data collected for diversion, your residents ran about 4.14 cycles per week on their FC30s and an average of 3.61 cycles per week on their Maestros or Eco 5s. So this is equivalent to about 279 kilograms per year per household being diverted, which equals 27.9 metric tons of food waste that is not going into your landfills per year from the 100 food cyclers in use. The 100 food cyclers in the township will also be diverting 36.3 metric tons of CO2e equivalents, which is the equivalent of reducing greenhouse gas emissions for taking 8.1 gasoline-powered vehicles off the road every year. And when we asked your residents about the number of standard garbage bags they generated prior to using their food cycler, it was about 1.15. And how much they generated after using their food cycler was about 0.84. So this translates to a reduction of 0.31 standard garbage bags per week per household, which is a reduction of 16.1 garbage bags per household per year that is not being trucked to your local landfills. And based on your bag tag fees alone, your residents on average are going to be saving about $36 each year, which represents, based on the unit that they purchased, a 4 to 4.5 year payback for residents. And when we asked residents if increased awareness of food waste motivated them to waste less food, a lot of people said that that did motivate them to waste less food. And we find that when people are managing food waste at home, it really makes them a lot more aware of how much they waste in the first place. And the most effective waste diversion strategy is to not generate any food waste to begin with. And even though this is a difficult kind of point that can be put into numbers, it's an added value that the solution provides and likely contributed to the reduction in garbage bags in the previous slide. So when we asked residents if the food cycler was large enough for the quantity of daily food waste they generated, 72% of people who chose the Maestro or Eco5 said that yes, it was. And out of those that chose the FC30, 59% said it was the right size. In previous pilots, which only had the FC30 as an option, we saw anywhere from 40 to 65% of people indicating that it was the right size for them. So this suggests that offering the Maestro or Eco5 would double the capacity, greatly increase resident satisfaction with the size of their food cycler. That being said, 40% of your residents who chose the FC30 still said that they wish that they had a larger unit, indicating that price might be a factor in the choice of their device. So the ability to purchase a second bucket is an option available to those residents. So it effectively doubles the capacity of their food cycler and is also a cost-effective solution. When we asked your residents about electricity costs during the pilot, only 8.7% reported seeing an increase, and 55% of your residents reported that they were unsure. So this typically indicates that any increase in costs were either negligible or acceptable to residents. So when we asked your residents if the municipality were to offer a food cycler program at low or no cost, 91.25% of your residents indicated that they thought that their friends and neighbors would participate in a food cycler program. And an overwhelming 90% said that they would recommend the food cycler based on their own experiences. And we have a few quotes from residents indicating how much they enjoyed the ability to utilize their food cycler. And so this slide is pretty self-explanatory. It speaks to the success of the pilot. 98.7% of your residents will continue using their food cycler as a solution to their food waste moving forward. And this level of participation really far exceeds any other organic waste management solution there is out there today. For example, the Green Bin, which has weekly pickup here in Ottawa, really only has a 57% adoption rate. And when we look at backyard composting, something that's available to everyone with the space to do so, the rate of adoption has been fairly stagnant for decades. And based on the results that we saw in one of the first slides, it's very low across your municipality. So the 98% participation rate in this program is incredibly encouraging and speaks to the willingness of your residents to adopt this program. And overall, your residents rated the pilot a 4.5 out of 5 stars, with 65% of your residents rating it at 5 stars. This really is a testament to all the work that you've put into planning and launching the pilot. And on this slide, we wanted to include a couple of constructive comments that we received from residents. It talks about pricing as well as having the option to have a drop-off point for residents to drop off byproduct that they wouldn't be using in their homes. And just to recap everything that we've discussed, 27.9 metric tons of food waste is being diverted from your landfill per year from the 100 food cyclers in the pilot. Your residents reported a 0.31 bag reduction per week, which equals 16.1 bags per resident per year of food waste being diverted. And 98.7% of your residents said that they would continue using the food cycler. And in terms of next steps, in order to fully understand the life cycle analysis of your food cycler organics program, we've developed an emissions calculation tool. It's a consultative tool, and it allows you to assess the impact your community has by eliminating greenhouse gas emissions and how it can continue to have an impact on your sustainability efforts. We also do have a new model coming in 2024. It's going to be a 3.5 liter model, and it would have a smaller footprint than the FC30 for any of you who have the FC30. And as I mentioned, we are finalists in Impact Canada's Food Waste Reduction Challenge. And as one of our early implementing partners, you do have first right of refusal on any funding that we do provide. And we are also looking at potentially having a program expansion for 200 food cyclers in the community. And to just give you a quick idea of the cumulative metric tons over the average lifespan of food cyclers in the community, you're really looking at the status quo with the number that I expanded upon, but with 200 more food cyclers being 300 food cyclers in the community, you're looking at diverting approximately 587 metric tons over the lifespan. There we go. And also to just kind of give you an idea of what it might look like to have a organics waste management solution that is food cyclers. In the city of Nelson in BC, it's about the same size as Kincardine. They have adopted the food cycler as an organics waste management solution, and some of the resources that are in place there is a partnership with the local grocery store. It hosts a refill station where residents can access carbon pellets for their filters for free. We also have a local repair program, bear-proof bins for residents who don't use their soil amendment, an e-waste recycling program, and an extensive education resource program. So the possibilities of expansion really are endless, and that's something that we can look at in Georgian Bluffs over time. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Are there any questions?
Thanks, Vera, for the presentation. Yeah, there was a lot of positives come out of that presentation and what's going on over the past few months with this project. So some great initiatives there for sure. I am going to offer up for any comment from council. Anyone would like to make a comment? Not seeing any. So thanks
Okay.
again for your presentation. Greatly
Thank you so
appreciated.
much.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much. Have a good night.
All right, on to 9.3.1. It's the CAO 2023-12 short-term accommodation review and next steps. I have three presenters here, I do believe. Number one is Juan Marzal. Juan, you have 5 minutes to make comments. You're muted there, Juan.
Can you hear me now?
You betcha.
Okay. I was a member of the STA work group with the township. And the thing that struck me in the beginning was that it was introduced, the STA situation was introduced as a problem that needed a solution. And the problem was the framework of the problem was around the noise, partying, disruption to neighbors, parking, and garbage. And all I'd like to say is that from the programs that you had during the summer, you made 400 visits to STA work groups, and there was not one incident that was observed. And also of the 170 STAs that were operating in the township, over the 4 months of the summer, that amounts to over 20,000 days or nights that are available for people to rent the STAs. And you had one verified incident, which was a violation of one of the bylaws. So I think that if it's a problem, it needs to be framed around something else, because from the observation, you have a significant sample. It wasn't, there wasn't significant noise and issues with bylaws. The other thing that I'd like to mention is that in the meetings with the work group, some of the business people made comments that they, depend significantly on the short-term accommodations. And one of the participants, the business participants, mentioned that in his business, and he happens to have a business which runs all the ATMs in the township, he observes a 50% increase in cash during the summer months, which is due to people coming into the township and into the municipality for visits and to spend their money and to visit businesses and contribute to the economy of the township. And the last point that I'd like to make is that it's really in the township, it's the only significant form of accommodation for people are the STAs. So if the economy depends on STAs, it's really the only form of accommodation for people that come to visit the township. I am an STA operator, and I'd like to work together with the township and display the township in the most positive light for visitors and for the community. I submitted a letter with comments, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Juan, for your comments. All right, next up is Calvin Confer. Welcome, Calvin. You have 5 minutes to present.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity. On page 2 of the report, it says STAs represent the only option available to visitors to the township for accommodation. I found this a bit misleading, as we have a number of hotels within, say, less than a kilometer. A couple on the south end of Owen Sound. There's another hotel at the east end on Highway 6 and 21. Cobble Beach, I believe, operates an inn and has adjoining cottages that they rent out, hotels in Wyerton. And of course, if there truly were demand for hotel accommodation, we would have a hotel in Springmount or Shallow Lake or some other commercial district within the township. So my only comment on that aspect. I believe the report sort of lumps together owner-occupied and, let's say, STAs that are for which the owner is not there. I believe we should look at this separately and differently. Different approach to an owner-occupied B&B. An owner-occupied, there's an on-site presence of the owner that inhibits misbehavior. The on-site owner is there to police the operation, police the people that are renting there for the night, police litter and other things. According to the regulation of a owner-occupied bed and breakfast should be light, perhaps limited to a registration, maybe a requirement for liability insurance, a limit on the number of rooms available, and so forth. A nominal fee, if any. And here I thought the fee was a little high. The other aspect of an owner-occupied B&B is that because it's an owner-occupied residence, it isn't reducing the stock of residential housing, which can be a problem. Where there's no owner present, the business, it's a business. It's being run as a business and simply skirting any regulation that would be in place concerning inns or hotels. And by regulations, I'm thinking of building codes, fire codes, sprinkler systems, disability access, parking spaces, and so on that would be attendant to an inn or a hotel. Septic is another issue. I know there's a one on my street. It was a single small building, maybe 600 square feet, small septic system. Now there are 2 bunkies there. In effect, we have an operation that is 3 times the size with no change in the septic facility. Don't know if it's adequate or not. As well, without an owner on site, the policing of behavior, litter, etc., is left to neighbors and police. That's a burden on neighbors. It's a burden on the municipality in policing costs. And as well, we're exacerbating the housing crisis we have in this country because it's taking residential stock or residential supply out of I think it should be the non-owner occupied should be recognized as a business. It's operating as a de facto inn or a motel. They should be initiating zoning changes to enable the VRBO or STA as a permitted use in the zoning. They should be meeting the standards for an inn. They should have, if the standards require sprinklers, require fire suppression equipment, that should be part of it, and so on. And as well, I think they should be required to obtain permits. And as they're operating as a business, they should pay taxes as a business, not as a residence. I think whatever council decides, enforcement is critical, and there should be substantial penalties for non-compliance. We have an opportunity, if council proceeds quickly, we have an opportunity to communicate any policy and regulations required when we send interim tax notices out in February. Thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you, Calvin, for your comments. Yeah, very good. Our third presenter is Ann Newman. Ann, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Just to sort of set a bit of a stage here, I've been a proud resident of the township of Georgian Bluffs since 2014. 9 of those years living in Shallow Lake, and recently moved up to Mountain Lake in the subdivision up there. I applied to join the STA working group because I am a frequent user and have been since 2017 of Airbnb all across Canada, from Nova Scotia to Vancouver Island. And I wanted to ensure that the experiences that I had in Airbnb and STAs were shared with staff. And I guess what I would like to confirm is that we are a tourist township. We need accommodation to ensure that we can continue to provide it to tourists who are coming into town. I believe that the policies and the procedures that the STA working group has proposed are good. They are appropriate for our town and our situation, and that combined with the fact that, and Juan was one of them, but there was a number of providers of Airbnb and short-term accommodation sitting on the working group, very much reflect the fact that people know what they're doing, quite frankly. They know how to manage their guests, and the guests know how to manage themselves too. It was very rare for us to have encountered any situation that would have ensued, I guess, where threats were made to people or people weren't conducting themselves properly. So I highly support the recommendations of the STA regulations and the Good Neighbor Agreement, and I encourage council to approve them at the meeting that they will be brought forward to. So thank you for the time.
Thank you, Ann, for your comments. All right, moving on, we're going to go on to 7.2, items not on the agenda. Any person who wishes to appear before council regarding an item not on the agenda may make written application to the clerk by the Thursday preceding the meeting they wish to speak at. To register, it's www.georgianbluffs.ca/delegations or call the clerk's office 519-376-2729, extension 603. 7.2.1, Tim Lanthier, Grey Sauble Conservation Authority draft budget for 2024. Welcome, Tim. You've got 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. Advance one slide, please. Thank you, Council, for seeing me today, inviting me to come talk to you about Grey Sauble's budget for 2024. What I'm proposing to do today is give a high-level overview of who we are. two of the members sitting here on council are on our board, but I'll nonetheless provide a high-level overview of who we are, what we do, what we're proposing to do in 2024 at a high level through our strategic plan, and then get into some of the details of the changes to the budget in 2024 over 2023. Following that, at the discretion of the Deputy Mayor, I would welcome any questions and comments from council. Slide, please. So what we do at Grey Sauble, or rather why we do it, is we have a vision of a healthy watershed environment in balance with the needs of society. So we're doing this to protect to keep our community safe, to protect the natural environment, and to help create a healthy environment for our community and our residents to live in. Slide, please. So we do this by managing natural resources and working with our stakeholders. We protect people and property from loss of life and damage to that property through the flood management and natural hazard management programs that we offer. We create and manage natural spaces. So we have 29,000 acres of natural spaces that are available to the public. And we connect people with information. So as a service provider, one of the things that we're constantly doing is collecting and disseminating information out and using that information to make educated, informed decisions. Slide, please. So under our current strategic plan, the 5 strategic plan goals are to better monitor and manage flood risks, to enhance GSCA land management, to support the development of watershed plans with our municipal partners, to improve water quality, and to strengthen environmental education and communication. Slide, please. So in 2024, some of the things that we're looking at doing under this existing strategic plan framework are to update our natural hazards asset management inventory and plan. So that's a continuation of asset management work that we're already doing at the authority. And this is a new regulatory requirement, but we're already well underway with it. We'll be undertaking, hopefully, a renewal of some natural hazard studies. So that includes floodplain mapping. And as you'll hear later this evening, it may also include a regional shoreline management plan. We'll be completing an ice management plan, which is a new regulatory requirement under the Changed Conservation Authorities Act. And we'll be completing flood and erosion structures operational plan, which is also a new requirement. Slide, please. In terms of the enhancement and the management of GSCA lands, we'll be maintaining our asset management plan, as I mentioned. We'll be finalizing a land strategy and a land inventory, both of which are new regulatory requirements. And we'll be finalizing our Inglis Falls management plan and our Eugenia Falls management plan, which are 20-year visions for those properties. Slide, please. Under the support of development, supporting the development of watershed plans with our municipal partners, one of the new things that we must do under the Conservation Authorities Act is to create a watershed-based resource management strategy. And the best way to think about this is almost a strategic plan for the programs that we already offer and looking at how those integrate across the watershed. So this will be a big project. It'll require a lot of public consultation. And as I said, it is a new requirement for us under the Act. We'll be updating our base map data based on new LiDAR information that we've got. So that's digital mapping, digital elevation models, and that helps us make better informed decisions on natural hazards. We'll utilize this LiDAR to update the floodplain maps and hopefully to update shoreline mapping as well. Slide, please. In terms of improving water quality, every year we plant tens of thousands of trees across the watershed. Over the last 20 years, we've planted over 3 million trees over the watershed. And so this year we're aiming to plant over 50,000 trees. We continue to collect sub-watershed data, so water quality data throughout the watershed. And this is one of those Category 3 programs that we talked about earlier in the year that the municipality supports the Conservation Authority doing. We work with our agricultural partners across the watershed to help improve agricultural practices to reduce impacts on water quality. And we'll continue to work on source water protection to the benefit of all of our residents. Slide, please. And finally, our environmental education program. We're planning to expand our environmental education program in 2024 with funding that we've received from the Conservation Authority Foundation, or the Grace Sabo Conservation Foundation, as well as our day camp funding. And we're currently looking for corporate sponsors or community sponsors for that as well, but that will not currently be a levy funded program. We are in the process of updating our strategic plan, so we'll be looking at a 10-year vision for our strategic plan, and we'll be back with the municipality to consult on that in 2024. Slide, please. So essentially, when we look at the difference between the 2023 budget and the 2024 budget, what we're seeing in terms of levy is we've now broken it into Category 1 programs, so mandatory programs, and Category 3 programs, because Category 2 don't include municipal levy. So we're looking at a $78,000 increase to the Category 1 programs across the watershed, so across our 8 municipalities. And we're looking at a $4,600 increase to those Category 3 programs. This increase is almost entirely driven by staffing resources. So we are a service provider. The number one cost in our budget is staffing. And with the changes that have been happening through CPP, through OMERS, through WSIB, as well as just inflation and trying to keep up and catch up with that, that's where we're seeing the primary change in the cost to our budget. So what I would note is the total increase cost to staffing in our budget for 2023 to 2024 is $285,000. Some of that is new staff, but they're not being funded by levy. They're being funded by self-generated revenues. And so when we look at the total amount of self-generated revenue that GSCA is contributing towards that budget breakdown, we're moving from the 1.8 million self-generated in 2023 to 1.98 million in 2024. Slide, please. So I think I've mentioned to council before that when Conservation Authority started out, it was really a partnership between the ministry and the municipalities with a roughly 50-50 split between those funding sources. This is what it looks like today. So the dark green piece of the pie on the left-hand side, as well as the very light blue piece on the top, represent self-generated revenues. And that's about 53% of the total is generated by Grace Sabo. The two blue pieces of the slide on the right-hand side, so the large dark blue and the small light blue, represent municipal levy, Category 1 and Category 3. And that's about 41% of the total cost of our budget. And the remaining portion at the bottom is provincial funding. So a very, very small amount remains from that original 50%. And then the larger piece of those two small pieces of pie is for drinking water source protection. Slide, please. So when we start to think about what does this mean for the taxpayer, and because we're all obviously when we talk about levy, we're talking about tax dollars, and we're talking about how does that impact individuals. So the way our levy works is it's based on a modified current value assessment. So whatever the value assessment is within your municipality or ultimately within our watershed, that's used to define how the levy is distributed amongst municipalities. So for us, and we base it on how much per $1,000 of assessment is the levy. And so for our levy, it's about 11 cents per $1,000 of assessment. And what that looks like in practical terms is for a house that's valued or assessed at $500,000, the cost of our levy from that household would be $56 per year in 2024. That's up $1.60 from 2023. Again, that's not per resident, that's per household. And obviously, if the house is assessed lower, that number's lower. If it's assessed higher, that number's higher. It's just for example. Slide, please. So I thought it was important to break down the increase to the levy for 2024. And so, as I said, the combined amounts of Category 2 and Category 3, or rather Category 1 and Category 3, are about $83,500. Of that, all but 4.7% of that $83,500 is staffing cost. The 4.7% of $83,000 is other things in our budget that aren't attributable to staffing costs. So what we're looking at is COLA to help staff keep up with inflation, similar to what our municipalities would apply. We're looking at standard merit increases to make sure that our staff are moving along the structured grid as is reasonable and responsible. as well as uncontrolled costs associated with CPP, EI, OMERS, and benefits from our provider. Slide, please. And so this slide lets you see what that looks like broken down. So we have 8 member municipalities within our watershed. It's not a 1/8 share of the pie for each municipality. It's based on that value assessment. So the municipalities that have the highest assessed value of properties pay the highest amount of levy, or the highest portion of that levy. That's from the Conservation Authorities Act, and these numbers are handed down to us from the province. We don't control that. What we do control is what our total budget number is. How it's divided out is based on these formulas. So you can see that Georgian Bluffs sits about in the middle compared relative to our other municipalities. So Georgian Bluffs is about 13% of the total levy. On the high and low ends, Town of Blue Mountains is 28-29% of the total levy, and Township of Erin Elderslie, the Township of Chatsworth, sit around 2.5 to 3% of the total levy. Slide, please. So in terms of next steps, we're required under the Act to circulate to our municipal partners for 30 days. We've put it out for almost 50 days, so it was circulated at the end of October, and we'll be going back to our Board of Directors on December 19th. So it's a week and a half from now for a vote on this budget to say whether they approve it or they don't approve it. In that interim time, which is now, we put the offer out to come and talk to council and to receive feedback from council on anything that you would like to tell us about our budget, any questions that you might have that we can hopefully answer for you. And then it gives you an opportunity to provide direction to the members of your council that sit on our board who will ultimately be voting on that budget. And with that, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I would welcome any comments or question that council may have.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tim. It was a great presentation. Appreciate it. Is there any comments from council so far? I know we are going to move into the next piece here while we got you in the building. So is there any questions and comments right now before we get to the letter? Yep, go ahead, Councilor Day.
I know that this is a separate piece compared to the budget, so this may not be an appropriate time to ask this question, but I also know there's a great curiosity from council and perhaps some staff about the renovations to the admin building. So perhaps just clarifying that that's not part of this budget, but a separate charge, and the timeline for when that will be looked at might be a timely conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah, so the renovations that we're proposing to our administrative center are not included in this budget right now. We don't have final costs for that, so we're working with an architect right now to go through the design phase, and we expect to have Class B costing done by June of 2024, and it will go forward to our board of directors at that time. Once we have those firm numbers, or as firm as you can have before going out to tender numbers in hand, that's when we'll be looking to speak to lenders, so Infrastructure Ontario or one of the banks, local banks, to talk about how we amortize that cost over a longer period. And then we'll be talking to municipalities, including senior staff and municipal councils, about what that funding formula could look like.
No, one of our members who's likely to watch online at some point in time is also curious about what drives the need for the renovations, and if it's an urgent need or something that could be delayed to another time when the economy is in a better position.
Well, our building was built in 1976, and if anybody has been to our building, you would see that it is an urgent need. There are many things that need to be repaired immediately. Additionally, the building needs to be brought up to date in terms of its effectiveness and its efficiency for providing the business function that it does provide as an office. So this includes things like rerouting electrical, rerouting IT infrastructure, redoing the roof, redoing the entrances, making sure that the offices, there's adequate and appropriate office space for the existing staff within the building. In terms of putting it off further, I don't want this to sound crass, but I don't think kicking something down the road is the right solution. And I'm yet to see cost of construction come down. So I do expect that cost to continue to rise. And I know nobody wants to spend money at any point, but inevitably, these things, all of our assets, as the municipality would be aware, do need investment to extend the life of those assets. And the alternate solution is, I think, spending more money to build something new, which does not seem appropriate or effective.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments and the time you're taking to come in and speak to us tonight to answer anyone's questions.
Any further questions? Seeing any further questions? Thanks, Tim, for the presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sit tight here. You're the next one on the agenda here again, so there may be some questions there. All right, moving on to 9.2.2 CES 2023-27, Letter of Support for Grace Harbor Conservation Authority Climate Resilient Coastal Communities. The recommendation reads that the mayor be authorized to sign a letter of support on behalf of councillors of the Grace Harbor Conservation Authority in support of funding application to the Natural Resource Canada. Can I get a mover and a seconder? Councillor Day, Mr. Winters, and I was going to turn over to Niall for any comments.
I will defer any comments to the far more knowledgeable person sitting just behind me if there are any questions.
Thank you for that, Niall. Questions from council? Mayor Carlton.
So I was just going to suggest that perhaps we have a brief description of what exactly the intention of this is, just for the general public to understand what council is supporting here with Grace Harbor.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we've been, it's not specific to us, but a very unique and rare opportunity has arisen here in the fact that Natural Resources Canada has come forward with a grant to look at climate resilient coastal communities. That's the name of the grant. And the idea is to look at the fact that climate change is a reality, climate change is happening, and there are going to be impacts associated with climate change. One of those impacts is going to be to coastal communities. So Natural Resources Canada is looking at the Pacific coast, they're looking at the Atlantic coast, they're looking at the northern coast of Canada, but they're also looking at the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Basin as a major waterway, and quite honestly, in Ontario, a major population base for a lot of the population of Canada. So the reason I say that this is a rare and unique opportunity is that they're proposing to fund 75% of these projects, 75% of the value of each project, and they're looking at these to be done on a regional basis. So we reached out to Conservation Ontario to say, is this something that we could do for all of the Great Lakes at the same time across all of the conservation authorities as the lead? Because it falls really within the mandate of the work that the Conservation Authority does to look at the impacts of the lakes on the coastal communities and on the shorelines. When we talked about that at a provincial level, it wasn't a need for all of the conservation authorities because there are 36 and they sit at various levels of funding, and some of them have already done this type of work. But what we came out with was the opportunity to do 6 pilot projects on each of the Great Lakes. And so when we looked at Lake Huron, we decided that Georgian Bay, if it wasn't directly connected to Lake Huron the way it is, it's large enough to be a Great Lake in and of itself. So we've partnered with Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority to look at a regional project that extends from the northern extent of the town of Wasaga Beach on the east end, all the way around to the northern extent of the town of South Bruce Peninsula on the west end, which is the northern terminus of our jurisdiction. And so in addition to partnering with Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority, we're looking at partnering with all of our municipal partners, both lower tier and upper tier within that area. And so far, we've been quite successful in getting letters of support from our municipal partners. So there are 7 lower tier municipalities and 3 upper tier municipalities across that stretch, as well as partnering with Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, who has provided a letter of support for this project as well. In addition to that, we also have a partner now that just signed on with us yesterday from the Toronto Metropolitan University. So there's a professor there that works in a program that looks at how government policy and water interact with each other. And they're very interested. So they're contributing both in-kind cost and financial cost in the form of master's and PhD students to this project. So what the project will actually be is looking at coastal resiliency. So the first step in determining coastal resiliency is figuring out what the coastal impact is to the shoreline. So that includes modeling of the bay and then mapping out the flood hazard, the erosion hazard, the dynamic beach hazard. So looking at that from a historic perspective, that perspective is not new. The information will be new because the last time we did this was in the mid-90s. But what is going to be new, and this is one of the requirements of the grant, is then looking at a climate change scenario and saying, what does climate change impact mean to the bay? And then what does that ultimately mean to our coastal communities? What we know from preliminary information is that the bay and the lake and Lake Huron are expected to rise between 30 and 40 centimeters over a 50-year time span. If we raise the lake vertically that much, the lateral impacts are expected to be substantial. So the next phase following the modeling is to look at vulnerability and risk assessments along the shorelines to see what does this mean in terms of our residents, what does this mean in terms of municipal infrastructure, and ultimately, what does this mean for our communities? From there, we want to have a lot of stakeholder and community engagement throughout the process to make sure that we're developing what we're going to be calling a climate resiliency plan or a coastal resiliency plan, so that we can take a look at it collectively as a community. So as municipal partners, as the Conservation Authority, as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the people who live in our communities, and say, this is the reality, this is the science, how are we going to deal with this? And we'll probably come out of that with, I imagine, short-term, mid-term, and long-term strategies for how we're going to adapt collectively to these changes in lake levels. So that's, in a very high-level nutshell, what we're looking at as part of this project. I think it's very important to note that although we're asking municipalities to contribute $15,000 a piece, $5,000 a year over 3 years, it's not so much that we as the Conservation Authority are asking you to give us money. We're saying we are creating and steering a large regional partnership, and the buy-in or the participation in this partnership is this amount of money. What I would note is that we're just totaling up the final numbers to send off today. When we look at financial cash cost as well as in-kind cost, we're looking at a project that's about $900,000 in value. The federal government is anticipated to be providing 75% of the cash value. Each municipality, we're asking for about 2.5% of the cash value, or that $15,000, and that's substantially less than 2.5% when we look at all of the in-kind and total value. So the ask from each municipality is $15,000 in cash spread over 3 years. So again, roughly $5,000 per year, as well as a commitment to be able to provide some of your staff time to help with the engagement in the steering committee, because it's very important to us that there is a lot of public engagement, and that public engagement is not just driven by the Conservation Authority, but it's also driven by the municipalities. It's driven by all of the partners that are at the table. Thank you.
All right, great explanation. Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Day?
Sometimes they're very hard decisions on council, and this does not feel like one of them. So I just wanted to endorse this, supporting this plan for a $900,000 research project that would only cost us $5,000, and I think do some of our staff excel in some of the work that you've described that would be needed. So thank you for sourcing this grant and leading the charge on this one.
Thank you. Further questions? Seeing any? All right, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you, Tim, for your
Thank
time
you very
tonight and
much.
presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, back to the beginning. Correspondence, we have nil. And we're into staff reports. 9.1.1 COR 2023-52 water rates. Recommendation reads, that council approve increasing all consumption fees by 7.1% to $3.92 per cubic meter, and that council approve increased base fees of 7% for the East Linton, Potawatomi, and Oxenden water systems, and the council approve a 30% increase for base fees for the Shallow Lake water system, and that staff be directed to bring forward a bylaw for enactment to the December 13th, 2023 council meeting to be in effect for the January 1, 2024. I need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Scholz, Councillor Day. I am going to turn this over to. Oh, sorry, Samantha, sorry.
No worries. Through your chair, so I'm just going to quickly go through the report a bit because I do want to provide council with the opportunity to ask questions. I recognize that a 30% increase can seem scary, and that's why we've provided a few different options for council to consider. So these rates were first introduced back on November 15th as part of our fees and charges review. And through that, in the report, we have provided some information about the historical asset costs and estimated replacement costs. I just want to note that the inflation rate that is used in the report is likely much lower than what actual construction costs have been. I can't find any reliable information about what water rate construction increases have been since the years of construction for each system. So CPI inflation was the best metric that I could find, but staff would anticipate it to be higher than what is shown. As you will see in the report, even with just the CPI inflated costs, the reserve balances that we currently have for each 4 water system is not sufficient. Each one is underfunded. With our smallest water system being Potawatomi, it is still underfunded by slightly under $600,000. There's limited number of users on that system that if something were to happen, you don't have a security blanket at this point. You don't have funds there to fix that. We also have included some options. So I just want to provide or ask if council has any questions on the options that were included.
So 4 options provided. They come yet.
Also, during November 15th, we did have some discussions about individual water rates to each water system versus a blended water rate. If council was looking to move to a blended water rate, you would need to do a water rate study in order to determine that. Right now, I would not recommend taking that on because we are currently redoing our asset management plan, and trying to accomplish both study and plan at the same time would be a duplication of work. That if it is something you wish to look into more, it would be beneficial after the asset management plan is done, as a lot of the information that will be included in an asset management plan would feed into a water rate study. That right now we would run the risk of having unreliable or even more guesswork included in a water rate study. I will answer any questions to the best of my ability.
Thank you for that, Samantha. Yeah, so yeah, moving forward, there's 4 options that were presented to us. Not up for discussion. Who would like to start? Councilor Winters.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Pringle. I mean, as I read this over and over again, I mean, I'm unsettled and I have a lot of questions. I mean, sitting here trying to make a decision on water rates, I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with using a water rate established by South Bruce Peninsula for a system and then blending it across all of our systems. They're all uniquely different. I struggle with, I know we need money, but I'm impressed to hear you say about a water rate study, because that's one of the recommendations I was going to bring forward tonight. If it has to be put on hold until we have our asset management plan done, I understand that. But we as council, and I say it collectively over the last 20 or 30 years of running water systems, I don't think have done a great job of that. And we're in this situation, but we have East Linton system at the current rate now, losing almost 100% of its water, and yet we want to increase rates to our residents to cover for costs that we're not properly managing. It just doesn't sit well with me here. At this point, I mean, one of the things I was going to kind of suggest and recommend is we need an increase in our water rates. Is that a 7% rate on all existing rates today? I might feel comfortable with that if that was a short-term solution, where we look at bringing in a water rate study. We look at optimization of our existing plants. What are the recommendations? Where's our water leakage study that we're talking about? I think we have too many things coming together at this point in time. I can't go home tonight thinking that a 30% increase is justifiable in a one rate thing. The economy is changing out there. So it can continually goes over my mind. And I know what the right answer is. We have to increase our rates, but I'm not sure blending them all the same is what I'm thinking at this time.
You were that? Yes, go ahead now.
So if I may, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Winters, you've articulated very well what staff have been going through over the past few weeks in terms of this one. I think you're right. We have a water rates issue, whether that be the consumption or the base rate, and certainly as we've heard over the last few weeks, we certainly have some challenges in East Linton, and so I don't think East Linton is the benchmark. I think East Linton is the outlier, because we certainly have some acute pressures in terms of the capital infrastructure under the ground in the East Linton system, as well as the future growth and development of that system. So I think you're quite right. We do see this as a little bit of a holding pattern. That's certainly why some of the options are in front here. The combined blended base rate, which is as you know, a fairly small portion of the overall income on systems, was established a number of years ago. The change, the difference we have in the base rates at this point in time, certainly something that staff have had some good conversation around setting perhaps going to a blended model through a fee study, a rate study in the future, based as Sam said on an asset management plan. I think the reason that we brought forward the recommendation is the 30%, which is aggressive. It reflects the fact that out of the three systems, and Potawatomi to one side, that's a secondary conversation, but out of the remaining three systems, Shallow Lake is the one which we're predicting is going to need to rely heavily on its reserves for its operating costs over the next couple of years. And so the 30% was put out really as that sort of 2-year stopgap to really try to make sure that we're not drawing down the reserve just to operate the system. And so that's the rationale really behind why we've picked a different number for that system as opposed to the others. But to your point, you're quite right. This is a holding pattern until we get that fee study done and have a much deeper understanding of the condition of that asset overall.
Councilors.
Sorry, I did forget one point or one question that I had. The agreement that we have with South Bruce Peninsula on the oxygen water system, it's up for renewal this year. Is that correct? The point I'm trying to make is if it isn't, it's very close, and trying to run into increased water rates before we know what that exact number is as well would be a concern that I have.
I believe through you, Deputy Mayor Pringle, and Ms. Buchanan, I'm sure will be able to confirm this. I think it is 2025 because that's the period that the current rate study that we have actually lapses. That's the last year of the current sort of rate study that we have hanging out there lapses. So I think it is 2025.
Yep.
I would agree. I think it's 2025, but I think we have to be negotiating a year ahead because I sent that agreement to Sam 6 months ago.
So through your chair, we did have to give notice of our intent to negotiate back in, I believe that was end of March of this year, which that was done. But I have not heard any more about when actual negotiations would have to occur.
Mr. Day.
I have two highly related questions. One is, what happens if a constituent can't afford to pay their water bills and stops paying their water bills as an essential liquid for life? It's similar to electricity in the wintertime. It can be very dangerous to not have access to clean water. Ontario has the Low Income Energy Assistance Program. I'm just curious if there's any municipal equivalent to that in some municipalities, if there's any relief projects that we could investigate or look at or consider for families who are really struggling with such an essential component of life.
So through your chair, currently we do not. We do have the water relief billing policy, but that would not be applicable due to financial hardships. Currently, the process that is done at the township is unpaid water It is given under the Municipal Act priority lien status, which means it can be applied to the tax roll and collected by the same means as taxation. So that is what we do twice a year, end of June and end of the year. Any unpaid water accounts are transferred to the tax account and then are to be collected under the same purposes of taxes.
Further questions?
Yeah, as you know, this is my first term on council and the first time we've really talked about such increases in water rates. So I'm relatively uneducated. Perhaps for those who have worked or participated in different municipalities in different ways, is this something that exists in Ontario, or is this something that is unheard of? And this may not be a question that is answerable at this point in time either, and I accept that fully.
So through you, Deputy Mayor Pringle, before I forget, 2027 is when the rate renewal comes up. Thank you to Brittany, who is online, for finding that fact out. Oh, it was you. It came from Brittany. My apologies. I think everybody got there at the same time. To you, Councillor Day, through you, Deputy Mayor Pringle, no. In my experience, now I don't have the greatest range of experience in municipalities, but working in the ones I have and the ones I have knowledge of, no, there don't tend to be specific programs for support and assistance around water rates in isolation. There are municipalities that do offer social support programs which can help with a range of different household costs, but not specific to something like water rates. And as far as I'm aware, there is nothing currently that would apply in our area.
Great, thank you. I know I'm thinking a little bit more long term here than just about this conversation. Unlike the previous decision about the coastal research, this one is a very difficult decision, and I'm sure I'm not alone in feeling like none of these are great options, and picking the best one at the moment needs to be our goal, but there will be something challenging about everything presented.
Council Winters.
Sorry, Sam, I should have asked you earlier, probably before the meeting tonight. Are you able to give us what the current usage rates are for each of the systems? We know the Occidental is 224 plus the 75%. But when we blend the rate to the $3 and whatever the change is there, will some of the usage rates actually go down?
So through your chair, that methodology of changing to be the blended rates for all four systems was implemented in the, I believe it was 2022 year. So there was analysis done because we were also at the same time, it kind of was grouping two different objectives together, removing the 0.5 cubic meters per day as a flat rate to remove that. So I don't have that information, but I believe it was included in the January report to council that I can see if I can find it.
So again, I believe through you, Deputy Mayor Pringle, the short answer to your question is probably yes. The reality is that the 392 rate is based on South Bruce times 2. So if we're assuming that it's roughly the same unit to generate water across the board, we have more users not on that system than on that system. So yes, that would bring that blended rate down. I think one of the things we need to do in terms of the water rate study is look at, and before anyone gets too excited by that, I think we have to look at the total cost of the operation of our water systems in a blended approach, and how we balance that between the consumption rates that we set and the base rates that are set. As we heard from GSS the other week in terms of the East Linton system, in GSS's opinion and view, and in the work that Jeff's done, he indicates about a 0.4 cubic meters per year household seems to be a fairly standard rate, and doesn't actually matter where you are. And certainly that seems to be borne out in all of our systems, apart from Potawatomi, where we obviously have a much smaller usage base in quite large households. So I think yes is the short answer to your question, but I wouldn't be holding my breath too much.
Thank you for that, Noel. Carlton.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Pringle. So I'm trying to think of this from the outlook, say, of a resident looking at this and the information that I think they'd want to have. So For the East Linton system, with high water loss off that system, when do we expect to be able to get in and do those repairs? Because I think that has a major impact on the costs that are being borne by the system. So that's my first question.
So through you, Deputy Mayor Pringle, we don't have a timeline for that. I think what we are now acutely aware of, and probably have been for a number of years, but it's come front and center over the last few weeks, obviously, is there's probably in the order of $6 to $8 million worth of repair work that's required in the East Linton system, and you've got the reserve balances in front of you, so that's a significant chunk of change, and that repair work should be borne or would be borne by the base rate at some point. We haven't programmed that work, and so that's not factored into this water rate that you see in front of you. That work we're anticipating bringing back as part of that 10-year capital forecast, which would come as a basis of that asset management plan. So it's not that we've forgotten that, it's the fact that we probably can't address it this next year. And so there is work that's needed to be done to factor that in. So yeah, we have between $6 and $8 million worth of repair work and main improvement work on the East Linton system, which is not addressed through this. And so the costs of that are not factored into these rates.
Okay, then I think you somewhat alluded to this, the asset management plan. What kind of time frame do we expect to be looking at to have that completed so that then we can start the water rate study?
So through your chair, it will probably be in a draft form for public comments come summer, and then it wouldn't be finalized until the fall at the earliest. It takes approximately a year with our consultants to complete.
So then we're after that before we're starting a water rate study, which is then going to be another 6 months to a year.
Yeah, I think through you, Deputy Mayor Pringle, the conversations we've had round the staff table on this one is, and one of the reasons why we flagged the fact that we think this is a 2-year program in this report is the earliest we think we'll get into the water rate study is probably in 2025 to bring it forward in time for 2026 budget year. And that's probably making Ms. Buchanan sweat slightly on that one, because that's at the aggressive end of the spectrum that we were talking about.
So the suggested rate increases here are really somewhat of a guess and a stopgap measure to get through the next 2 years. Okay. Then my last comment would be around the shallow lake increase. I really struggle with the 30% increase. I would option 4 that gives a 10% base increase. I know that stretches it out over a longer period of time, but I think from the residents' perspective, to tell them that they're going up 30% as one system, I think that's a really tough pill to swallow. And so far, I haven't seen anything that makes me feel warm and fuzzy about blending all the systems together. I think each one's so totally different that to blend them together and try to equalize over them all, just so far that doesn't make sense to me. So it's just my 2 cents worth on that one. Thank you.
Thanks for those comments. Any other comments? Councilor Winters.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that water systems, I mean, the users of the water systems are penalized on a daily basis. Shell Lake was built in 1996, 1997. It was approved and funded by the province of Ontario. There were some water chemistry issues that were there. We addressed that as a council. And then they changed staff at the Ministry of the Environment. And then they came back and they said, your construction of your building doesn't meet adequate design standards. There are sections of your wet well that don't allow chlorine contact time. Therefore, every time you turn the hydrant on, you go to a boil water, which caused the municipality to spend a couple $100,000 and implement UV lights. So, I mean, not all of it is township driven, it's province driven, but the users have to pay for this. I mean, I look at this and we have to do something. I get that. I look at option number 3 on the condition that we have our water operator, Aqua, which I know they'll come to the table and they'll do a presentation. I know they've done some reports on optimization, recommendations on revenue generating. But I think we need to get our asset management plan done. We need to do a water rate study. We need our water operator here giving us recommendations of what we can do to efficiently run these systems, find the leaks, find some sort of revenue. Is it solar panels? Is it hate regeneration isn't something. We owe it as a council to our water operator systems to do that. My recommendation would be option number 3. We have to do something on the invert.
Great comments. Any further comments? Yes, go ahead.
So through you, Deputy Mayor Pringle, just for clarity, the 4 options that are sketched out all do also include and assume the 7.31, 7 point something, 7.1. Yeah, the 7.1. So the 4 options all assume the 7.1 consumption increase. So the option 1, 2, 3, and 4 are just to the base.
Thank you, Councilor Winters.
And I think that's fair. You should pay for what you use, and historically, water usage goes down every year. People are becoming more conscientious of their water use. The fixtures are a little less. You can't continue to run a water system based on user fees. You need a base rate because of that. I agree, and I understand that. You know, you should be more money you pay, the more conscientious you're going to be about how you waste water. But having said that, we can't put all that on our residents. We have to find the leaks.
Thank you for that. So if I was to take what I did in the recommendation, if we were to break it into 4 pieces, that council approved increased all consumption fees by 7.1 to 392 per meter. And council approving base increased fees by 7% for Eastland and Potawatomi and Occidental. And the final staff direction for the bylaw is what we look at. We don't want the 30% increase to the Shell Lake water system. Is that what we're talking about?
So through you, Deputy Mayor Pringle, at the minute, although there hasn't been, I don't believe, an amendment put on the floor.
No, yeah.
I believe Mayor Carlton suggested option 4, which would basically replace the 3rd recommendation. So the 3rd recommendation that council approves a 30% increase to base fees for Shallow Lake water system would be replaced by 10% for option 4. And Councillor Winters also sort of shared the thought that that 7%, which is option 3. You could deal with that in one of 2 ways. You could either have that as a replacement for that 3rd recommendation, or you simply amend the 2nd recommendation and have 3 recommendations then that flow. But I don't believe there's an amendment yet put forward.
No amendment has been put forward yet. I'm just trying to get it clear in my head is where we're going. So obviously we're looking to amend. Councilor Day, you have a comment?
I just wanted to put some support behind option 4. I always try and consider the current residents as well as the future residents, and I am concerned about the reserves for the Shallow Lake water supply, especially. So that feels like perhaps the best compromise.
So you, Deputy Mayor Pringle, so option 4, which is the 10%, 10% does just in the 2nd year. I think we put $4,000 back into the reserve at that point. 8. So we just over the 2 years do get to a position where there is some money flowing back into the reserves, albeit fairly negligible.
Is there support for option number 4 for an amendment? Board. Mayor Carlton.
I would just like to comment on Councillor Winters' suggestion about talking to Aqua about efficiencies in the system. Are the things that we could be doing there that they would see, and perhaps having them come with a report. And yes, I would support that option 4, 7% base increase for Eastland and Potawatomi and Occidental, and 10% for Shallow Lake. We do have to be cognizant of the reserve balances there, but I think we also have to be aware of what a 30% impact would have on the residents out there.
Do I have a seconder to that? So, Isaac, yeah, go ahead, Isaac.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say I would support that as well, and if you need me to second that, by all means, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. So we have an amendment to the recommendation that we have to change the amendment to option number 4, followed with a report coming back from Aqua. We do have a mover and a seconder on the floor, correct? We're good to go. So I'll call the vote. All those in favor?
The amended motion.
on the amended motion? That is carried. And, sorry, now,
So, through you, Deputy Mayor Pringle, just wanting to clarify the amended motion. So the amended motion option 4, I get that bit. Was that before a report is received? The reason I say that is because we are under some pressure to get a bylaw up with the new water rates in. We have Aqua coming we will have Aqua coming as part of final budget, but that was after we had hoped to bring the bylaw forward. So are we wanting a report from Aqua? And to be honest, based on the conversations we had, I don't anticipate that they're going to be able to find any efficiencies that make an impact in the next 1 or 2 years. I think there's definitely a good conversation to be had with them as we get into the water rate study for sure, and around the asset management plan, which they're actively engaged in. But I'm just wanting to clarify whether the amendment includes a subject to Aqua coming and doing a report, or whether this is option 4 and looking forward to Aqua doing a report in the near future.
I believe you're correct on looking forward to a report coming back. Obviously, we are into the time frame. So amendment for option 4 was carried. Any opposed to that? One was opposed. So that is carried. And now I need a motion to I need to vote on the main motion that was before us. We have mover and seconder already. Call the vote. All those in favor? Main motion is carried. All right, thank you. All right, on to 9.1.2 COR 2023-53 cemetery fees and charges. Recommendation reads that a revised 2024 cemetery fees and charges as appended to report to COR 2023-53 be endorsed, and the staff be directed to present the revised fee structure with the 2024 fees and charges bylaw for adoption. I need a mover and a seconder. So winners, Councillor Day. And we will go to Hardy or speak.
For you, Chair Pringle. Not a lot of comment on this one. It is just a cost recovery increase to capture the increased fees from our cemetery contractor. I would be happy to field any questions, though.
Perfect, thank you. I know we had the conversation of the day there about the bottom row seems to be the tough ones to sell. I kind of looked at those prices. I thought maybe we could drop the prices a bit. I might get one. Anyway, thanks for that bit of information on that. I'm going to call the vote. Any questions? Call the vote. All those in favor? That is carried. All right, 9.1.3 COR 2023-54. Committee of Adjustment appointments. Recommendation reads that the report COR 2023-54 are received and that staff be directed to present a bylaw for enactment at the December 13, 2023 meeting of council to appoint councillors Kathy Moore-Coburn and councillor Ryan Thompson to the Committee of Adjustment from December 13, 2023 until December 13, 2024. Need a mover and a seconder. Today, Councillor Scholdice. Really want to speak to this?
For you, Chair Pringle. So this report is coming forward as it is a requirement of the Planning Act that these appointments of our council members be renewed on an annual basis. So seeing as we did appoint them in January of 2022, this bylaw is coming back to renew that appointment to satisfy the legislative requirements.
Discussion? Councillor Day.
I think I have a fairly obvious question or concern that neither Councillor Thompson nor Coburn are here tonight. Do we know if they're happy with those appointments for the following year?
For you, Chair Pringle, I did not get any objection to this being on the agenda via email, so I cannot speak for them at this point in time, but I do know that I didn't get anything from them flagging it being on the agenda. So,
is it imperative that this one go through this evening, or could we defer it to next Wednesday? I'm just a little uncomfortable putting something through when people in question aren't here.
for you, Chair Pringle. So I I did recommend that this be placed on the committee of the whole agenda in case there was discussion about a change in representation, but there's no reason that this cannot be deferred for consideration at the council meeting, save and except for that your committee of the whole, and you would defer to committee of the whole, but you would be deferring to council. So I would ask you to waive your procedure bylaw.
I did actually get what she said there. So we're going to waive the procedural bylaw to defer this to council next week. So I will move the motion to defer.
So
Do we need a motion first to waive the procedural bylaw? Or can we include all that in the deferral?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, we could do a motion to defer and also a motion to waive the procedure bylaw.
So we need a motion to defer. It's on the floor. But any mover and seconder?
No, I think the motion to defer and to waive the procedural bylaw can be one motion.
Sorry, just to back up. So if we could deal with the deferral first of the motion that's on the floor, and then if we did a separate bylaw, it's more clear, or sorry, a separate motion, it's more clear that we are waiving the procedural bylaw to allow that to happen.
All right, so I need a mover and a seconder to defer. Okay, need a seconder. Councillor Day. I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Great, that is carried.
Now we need a motion to waive the procedural bylaw to allow what we just moved to happen. I think we're working backwards, but that's okay. I'll make that motion as well.
Okay, so a motion's on the floor to move it. So move the bylaw for next week's meeting to move this to that period. We need a seconder. Councillor Winters. I will call the vote. All those in favor? That is carried. And do I go back to the main motion, main recommendation?
No, we
We're
deferred.
done? Okay, we're cool. Woo, good one. Still say it was easier to vote them through. Yeah.
Nobody give you this book.
So, that looks like more reading.
Robert's Rules of Order.
More reading. All right, thank you for that. We're going to move on to 9.2.1. The food cycler pilot results. Recommendation reads that council be directed to include as part of the budget for 2024 an extension and expansion of the food cycler pilot to a further 200 households, and that staff provide a further report back late 2024 on the program. I need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Day, Councillor Winters, and I'll turn this over to Niall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Pringle. I'll keep my comments very brief. We heard from a delegation earlier on this evening about the success of this one. I think it's fair to say that we entered the pilot not really knowing too much about how it was going to go. We took 100 units into the first round of this one. I think some of our neighbouring municipalities were a little lower. So we were fairly aggressive in launching a pilot. We had a very, very strong level of uptake. I think staff was slightly surprised at the high level of dropout after the initial surge of interest. We found it very difficult to get in touch with about 50% of the people that expressed interest in that initial surge. They didn't respond and weren't coming forward after the fact. So it did create a slight administrative hiccup in terms of getting these things out. It took us a second round to get rid of the second half of the units that we had. So it did take a little bit longer, and it was a little bit harder than we'd anticipated getting the units out the door, but it wasn't incredibly difficult. But what we did find was that the level of feedback that we heard anecdotally seemed to be very strong. We got good feedback from the pilot results, and if you were wondering what happened to the non-82% that didn't respond, at least 2 of those were in Keppel Sarawak School. I know there'll be some correspondence that was circulated amongst council on those ones. They obviously got started a little later in their pilot as they returned to school after the summer break. But as I understand it, they are doing well with them. So based on the positive uptake by community, the positive feedback and the positive results we've seen, staff are inclined to recommend that we move forward with a second phase of the pilot, that we do it a little differently this year in that we buy buy the units ourselves up front, and we sell them at the counter as we do compost bins, blue bins, and so on and so forth, so that we don't have to wait until we don't have a big day of trying to get rid of 200 of these things. We have them in stock. We pass them out as we go through the year, and then each person, when they pick them up, their 12-week pilot will start when they pick the unit up. They'll provide that feedback to Food Cycler in the same way as we have done this time, and at the end of the year we'll have a report similar to the one this time round, looking at how the success has been through this second stage of the rollout, second stage of the pilot, and some recommendations for taking it further from that point, or not, as the case may be. So we've definitely seen positive uptake. We're inclined to recommend that we continue. As Food Cycler mentioned earlier on, we have the opportunity to have a second phase of the pilot at pretty much the same terms and conditions as the first phase. We're recommending no change apart from that minor administrative change in how we handle the units this year. The only other thing that we've got tucked away in this report is we are suggesting that we carry some of the spare supplies, some of the carbon filters, a couple of spare buckets, and so on and so forth. And we can have those at the administrative office here, and we'd be proposing to sell those on at cost plus 15% just for the shipping and handling that we'll be paying to bring those units in as a service to residents that are using the Food Cycler and want to get their supplies directly from us rather than having to get them themselves through Food Cycler. So that's really it. I'm happy to answer any questions that might come up.
Thanks all for that. Yeah, any questions from council? Councilor Winter.
Just a pretty basic logistics question. Do we have to buy all 200 at the same time, or can we buy a minimum order, bring them so we're not inventorying them? My concern would be, based on what you said, everybody's positive until the checkbook comes out, right? Whether we sit on 200 of these and they have a 1-year warranty and I'm not selling them for 2 years would be a concern. If they have a minimum order that we can continually replenish our stock as they're going out, I'd feel more comfortable.
So through you, Deputy Mayor Pringle, something I briefly explored and I'm quite happy to explore a little further. So this would be 4 pallets basically. So it although 200 sounds like a lot, it's just one delivery in essence. So there would be an increased cost because of the shipping costs associated to that if we were to say break it into a pallet at a time. The other thing I'd have to double check is that we would be able to secure the same rates for those various different shipping. But if I'm able to explore that, I'm quite happy to take that as a sort of an indication and see if we could do that with them so that we're not ending up carrying surplus stock.
Further questions? Yeah, Councillor Day.
Very supportive of getting food waste out of landfills. It's a fantastic initiative and very eager to see it continue in Georgian Bluffs and surrounding communities as well. I am curious about at what point, if there is a point, does it make sense to investigate green bins compared to the Food Cycler or other methods of coping with food waste? I realized that in the presentation there was a very high adoption rate for this relatively small number of households who were choosing to join in it, and I'm not sure if that's a fair comparison to a mandated green bin program which had only a 57% adoption rate. But if we mandated the Food Cycler in all households, I think the adoption rate would probably drop.
So through you, Deputy Mayor Pringle, good questions, Councillor Day. I think it's fair to say that a green bin program, will be a consideration of the next tender that we put out. The indications have been fairly strong by the province through the Circular Economy Act for a number of years now that organics are going to be prohibited from entering the landfill stream at some point in the not too distant future. The timeline for that keeps shifting. They promised it in 2018. Again, it was promised to be no later than February of 2022. And there hasn't actually been an update on progress at the provincial level on source separated organics since, as far as I'm aware, since early 2022, when the last mumbles of that part of the Circular Economy Act were made. Having said that, I suspect, like many countries, we will see that come. And so as we enter into the tendering process for the renewal of our waste management contracts in 2026, We will have to consider what that looks like in terms of how we deal with garbage, the way in which it's collected. As we've discussed around the horseshoe earlier this year in regards to the blue box recycling programs, they're changing, and through those conversations already flagged the fact that manual waste collection like we get currently here is something that's likely to be unavailable beyond 2026. So I think the short answer to the question, which I'm making much longer than it needs to be, I apologize, is 2026 for the renewal of the waste management contract. We will certainly be bringing back an option to consider green carts or green boxes or green waste collection.
Thanks for that. No, Mayor Carlton.
Thank you. I think what I really like about the Food Cycler over a green bin program is that we've eliminated that trucking. You're not sending the trucks around, which is a greenhouse gas emission. On the Food Cyclers, is there a pending list of people still interested in those that didn't get into the program the last time?
So through your Deputy Mayor Pringle, we certainly have got that. So there's probably about 30 people that were unable to get ones on the second round that we offered them. We got much higher uptake on our backup list than we did on our first list. But there were about 30 people that were sitting, having given names that weren't able to, and a good handful that have come forward since then as well. And we've done no promotion. So staff feel that 200 is realistic, but I do take Councillor Winter's point and we'll explore that.
Thank you for that. Any further questions? Councillor Winters.
I guess I never did indicate my support. I think this is a great program, and I think if we can, social media, through our website, through your promotion, you start telling people that, you know, bag tags cost you money and you can save 16 bag tags per year, which is your footprint. Again, green bins are a solution, but when people start relying on other people to get rid of their garbage, you lose context to what that is. And I think realistically, it all starts at home, and you start to reduce, reuse, do what you can do. This is a start. I'm very supportive of this, but my concern was, I don't want to see 100 of them sitting here a year later if we don't have to. If we can keep the rotation coming, I think that's the way to go.
A good comment, Mayor Carlton.
I'm like Councillor Winters. I totally support it. And I didn't put my name in last time for one because I felt as the mayor that was stepping in front of the residents. So I didn't, but this time I will.
All right, any further comments? Not seeing anything, and I call the vote. All those in favor? That is carried. Very good, thank you. All right, on to 9.3, Office of the CAO, 9.3.1 CAO 2023-12, short-term accommodation review and next steps. Recommendation reads that subject to budget approval, staff be directed to develop a bylaw before April 2024 to regulate short-term accommodation, and that subject to budget approval, staff resources, part-time position and or contract services be identified for oversight of short-term accommodation program, and that subject to budget approval, staff bring forward an amendment to the fees and services bylaw before April 2024 to implement fees for being a licensed short-term accommodation with the intent to make the program cost neutral. Need a mover and seconder. Councilor Winters. Carlton. Now I'm going to turn it over to the acting CAO.
And through your Deputy Mayor Pringle, members of council, I'm going to stand up for this one. This is a little bit more of a formal presentation, so please forgive me as I go through this. It's going to take a few minutes to run through this one as well. I think I'm going to start by saying this was an incredibly significant body of work that staff has undertaken over the last 12 to 18 months or so, and there was some fairly voluminous materials put in front of council as a result of that work. And so I'm going to try and go through some of the highlights of the work that we've done over the last year or so on this body of work, and take any questions that there may be had. I should also note that we're not presenting in front of you at this point in time a bylaw. We've got some ideas on how we might want to head forward. If we've got this roughly aligned with council expectations, then the intent would be to work on this and bring forward the appropriate bylaws to put this into place in time for the summer season next year. So if we can skip on to the first slide. So I'm going to start by saying a massive thank you. As I said, this has been a big body of work. It's been a body of work which has involved pretty much every single member of staff in one way, shape or form, or half of the staff team at least in one way, shape or form. But there have been some members of staff who I want to call out that have done significant bodies of work on this. So Shannon Campbell, who's been on parental leave for a period of time, but she started this one rolling. Brian Putman joined as a backstop for Shannon after she left us for a period of time, and Brian did a sterling amount of work on this earlier on this year and handed on the reins really to Hayley, who's with us this evening, and Sarah, who's not with us. Sarah, congratulations, had an eight-pound baby earlier on this week. So she left us just before she was able to present this body of work to council earlier on this month. I also want to recognise the incredible support we've had by community on this one. So we've had by far and away the most successful engagement activities that we've seen as a township. So more than 600 members of the public excuse me, had participated, be that through the in-person engagement events, through the working group, and through participating on the online survey. So community has been outstanding in providing their input into this one. So just a bit of background as to how we got here. A delegation came in summer of 2022 expressing some concerns around short-term accommodations, a number of short-term accommodations that had caused community impacts, noise, parking, disturbance of community vitality, and significant concerns about the operation of short-term accommodations within residential neighbourhoods. Council directed staff to undertake some background work that was done through late 2022, and in part of the budget process in 2023, we undertook to do a body of work through the course of this year. This is really the summary up and conclusion of that body of work. In addition to the work that we're presenting today, there was and the research that was done in terms of short-term accommodations across the township and across other townships and municipalities in Ontario. There was a number of proactive pieces of work done in terms of enforcement. And in terms of looking at our bylaws, we updated our nuisance bylaw, our noise bylaw, so that we were more able to respond to the pressures that we'd heard about around short-term accommodations. And we put extra bylaw efforts into enforcement through the course of this summer as well. So I'm going to talk about two things. One thing that we're going to put off to one side. So the focus on short-term accommodations, and really this is helped guide through our official plan, which helps define what a short-term accommodation is by really making sure it's not a bed and breakfast or a hotel or another form of accommodation. So generally speaking, it's part or all of a dwelling unit, which is rented out for less than 30 days. They are, as I say, distinct and different from bed and breakfast and other forms of commercial accommodation. These are generally speaking taking place in residential houses. They are residential properties that are used as short-term accommodations. One of the things that we have spent some time looking into and thinking about over the course of this year is a municipal accommodation tax. This is something other municipalities have gone down, and certainly something that the township can consider. We're not recommending a municipal accommodation tax at this point in time, and I'll come on to talking a little bit about why we're not doing that. But the municipal accommodation tax is a revenue tool which is available to the municipalities to help generate revenue from overnight stays. That revenue is to go back into supporting tourism-related activities in the township. So tourism, first off, we're going to spend a couple of slides here, just some of the work we've done in terms of trying to understand the tourism base in the township. So do we have tourism here? How important is the tourism to the township, and what sort of tourists are we attracting? And how does short-term accommodation fit into that economic part of the township? So there are a number of impacts of tourism that we feel in the township on a day-to-day and year-to-year basis. And it's something which is year-round. One of the things that's come across as we've gone through this work is, whilst the focus of tourism is obviously on our summer season, we actually do have year-round tourism, and quite a number of visitors will come up in the winter. Although it's a less high-profile destination for the winter, we definitely do see winter tourism all year round. There are a number of benefits which are driven by tourism. These are benefits that we experience here in the township, but there are also benefits which are experienced across Grey County, and we've done some work with the economic development team there in terms of trying to understand that as well. We can move on to the next slide. One of the things we did was trying to understand who our tourists are and what they're bringing to the area and how they use Georgian Bluffs as they're going through it. And so we've done some work with the regional tourism organisations to try and understand some of the big data that's out there. This is the scary stuff that your cell phone collects in the background as you walk around without really knowing it's doing it. But what we did was just to try and get a sense of what we've got out there. This is not comprehensive by any stretch of the imagination, but it was to get a general sense of what was happening. We picked a few areas in Georgian Bluffs that we know that people are coming and visiting, and did some geofences around them. We're able to get data from the Regional Tourism Organisation generated by people's cell phones as to the sorts of people that are going into these sorts of places. If we skip on to the next slide, what we can see is this is a sort of data we can generate. So we can generate information around the sort of median income of people, what they're spending, how often they're coming, how long they're staying for, where they're going to, and what their interests are. And again, if we move on to the next slide, what we've been able to do through that data is for the 7 sites we looked at, we're able to identify the sort of the general trend of visitors. So the number one group of visitor that comes there, and we've got a fair good mix of people that are coming and experiencing the township and seeing them going into different places. So again, I'm not going to spend too much time on these slides, but different places in the township, unsurprisingly, are attracting different visitors. So Big Bay, for example, we've got what they call the Old Town. The Old Town Rose is a group. I'm not in big data. I don't know how you do this, but there is a certain visitor trend that will be going there as opposed to the visitors that will be attending to places like Cobble Beach and so on and so forth. And if we skip on, and again, through each of the areas we were able to look at, we were able to derive what's coming here. I think one of the things that came across to Haley and myself and the team as we started looking through this is the significant mix that we've got. We've got people that are simply passing through on their way up onto the peninsula, and then we've got other people that are making a distinct visit to Georgian Bluffs. And when they're making that visit to Georgian Bluffs, we're seeing people that are really quite invested in the environment. They're very invested in the natural scenery and the natural heritage. And that is actually quite odd because it's very different from the people that are drifting up onto the Bruce. So the people that are drifting up onto the Bruce Peninsula, which we pulled out from this, a lot of them you'll see the shallow lake. That's the numbers there are skewed because people passing through. A lot of the people heading up onto the Bruce Peninsula are actually just interested in the Instagram moment. So they're not actually interested in investing in the environment. In fact, quite a lot of them have given up on the environment and actually think there's nothing they can do. There's a fairly fatalistic approach for the visitors that are drifting up onto the Bruce. That's quite distinct from the pattern that we see in a lot of our visitation in the township. Our visitation really does see environment and natural heritage as something which is a core draw. So there's definitely something that we can tap into there as we move forward. If we can skip on. So how do we learn from people? We used a number of different methods to get out there and ones that we've had some significant success with this year. So we had an online survey. That survey is available in hard copy as well. And so we had that distributed at all of our the administrative offices here and across all of our community centres. We also took feedback into that survey through phone calls, emails, letters, and so on and so forth. And we also welcomed those sorts of feedback beyond the survey feedback in itself. We had an in-person consultation event as part of the Engage and Collaborate event at Grey Roots. And then we had the working group that was comprised of 3 operators, 3 members of the public, and 3 business owners in the community. Unfortunately, one of the operators wasn't able to participate in the meeting, so we had 2 operators in the end, 3 members of the public and 3 business owners. We did significant publications through news releases, press releases, social media, radio advertising, and so on and so forth, and we'll touch a little bit on that later on. But in total, it generated 563 responses, the majority of which came from residents across the township, property owners across the township and beyond that are not actually operating short-term accommodations but have a view to share in them, and in a smaller number that were owner-operators and visitors into the township. We can skip on. This is a significant number, certainly compared to some of the others. So about 20,000 people were touched in some way, shape or form by the engagement activities that we took. And again, just breaking down the slides, and I know we've talked about these a little bit before. So the 1,900 of people that have clicked onto the Engage website and looked at some of the materials on there, the informed of the people that have hung around and perhaps opened 1 or 2 documents on that website, and then the 565 are the ones that actually delved in and answered the surveys. And so the survey tool was by far and away the most well picked of the engagement methods that we did. But as I say, we did have other options available to people. Skip on. As we said before, This is not a statistically valid survey. We shouldn't read too much into this data, nor should we ignore it. It is indicative. The people that have people that pick to engage with us on this are the people that have something to say. We probably haven't reached the people that sit in the middle that don't have an opinion one way or another. We are generally speaking going to hear from people at both ends of the spectrum, those that have something strongly positive to say or something strongly negative to say, depending on what their perspective is on short-term accommodations. And so we don't know what the middle says, and this isn't statistically balanced. It also does have equity perspectives to it in that we offered the survey in English. Our English is the language we speak in our engagement events and so on and so forth. And although we try to be as equal in terms of our access to people, the methods that we use are not necessarily equitably accessible to all members of community. And so that's worth keeping in mind. So these numbers really reflect some of the stuff we've talked about already. The vast majority of respondents and participants in this were residents and operators who are not owning short-term accommodations. They have a range of experiences with short-term accommodations, from being users of short-term accommodations to being people that have had no impact from them, to people that have experienced impacts from short-term accommodations in their community. I think one of the interesting stats I want to pick out here is that 35% of resident responses are aware they live in a neighborhood with a short-term accommodation. That probably shows that most people aren't aware that they do live in a neighborhood with short-term accommodations, because they're actually in pretty much every neighborhood of the township. So most people in the township will live within a few hundred meters of a short-term accommodation, with the exception of folks that live down towards the Derby and Kilsyth end of the township. Everywhere else, these are fairly prolific and spread across, not prolific, but fairly well spread across the whole of the township, across our communities. Let's skip on. So what did people say was important? Well, the first one, again, thinking of these and the link to tourism. Tourism is important to people. They recognize it's important to the economy of the township, and it's important to the businesses that people work in and the businesses in the township. So that was something that came through as important for people. And so I think that was important for us to see. If we can skip on. In terms of the impacts, and these two ones that are circled in red are not necessarily the most visible, but the top two issues that came through from members of the public in terms of concerns around short-term accommodation were in terms of the noise disturbance. That was the number one issue. And the second one was the loss of the community feel, empty neighborhoods, and the rotating neighborhood sense. So that sort of detachment from a community feel that people value is certainly something that was strongly reflected in the feedback that we had. Skip on. So we got a high level of people that are responded, and this is one of the things that staff has really tried to wrestle with, and you'll see this reflected in the report to some extent. So a high number of people have been negatively impacted by short-term accommodations, and we've got some strong feelings around short-term accommodations, and these numbers certainly don't resonate with what we're seeing in terms of bylaw complaints that come through to the township, and in terms of the issues that we've identified through some of the proactive work this year. So there's definitely something to be picked at there, and what I think one of the lessons we can draw from this is it doesn't take much for a short-term accommodation to become significantly disruptive. So it doesn't take many of these to become a problem, which becomes a problem for the entire community. And one problem can have a lasting impact. So one noisy resident living next to you, one case of disturbance can have an impact which lasts many, many months, if not across several years. And so short-term accommodations have a magnified impact in community, is what we believe is happening from this. And that magnified impact is something that we really do need to reflect on. It doesn't actually matter if there's not many problems, because just one or two problems can be enough to really impact a neighborhood or a community. We skip on. So again, we asked people, these are some of the resident responses. We asked folks what they'd like to see in terms of how their township might control these. And again, not necessarily significantly different from what other municipalities have seen. The top couple of issues coming out of here were looking at occupancy limits, trying to limit the number of people that use short-term accommodations, good neighbour agreements, making sure that there is a good local contact. So in the case that there are issues and challenges, that there's someone local that can deal with it in a very, very quick way. And again, that's the fourth one, the response type. Okay, we can skip on. When we asked the operators, we asked them different sets of questions. We asked tourists different sets of questions to try and dig in. Our operators, which was a much smaller number of responses that we had, and so obviously the percentages per response are different here. So our operators have had a good experience of operating short-term accommodations in the township. The vast majority of them are relying on services that are provided by local businesses, either landscaping, contracting, cleaning services, property management services, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of local business that they're relying on to run their businesses. The vast majority of visitors to short-term accommodations tend to be family groups, and we did ask them about mat tax, and most operators weren't in support of a mat tax at this time. The reason they cited for that is it's not a cost to them, it's a cost to their users, and so it's just simply a flow-through cost that they are going to flow through to their users and probably and have to administer, and so they weren't in favor of that. There was also some nervousness that they didn't know what it would be spent on, how the municipality would utilize that money on a go-forward basis. So we can move on. Again, thinking about the operator responses, more than half of them are living in the township currently. So whether they're in a primary residence, so they're renting out space in their primary residence, or whether they have a second house in the township, a cottage or a seasonal property that they're perhaps renting out as a short-term accommodation, most live here. There is a sizable number, however, that don't necessarily live in the township. Some of them might be quite local. It might just be in Owen Sound or up in Wyerton, but there are a significant number that don't live in the township itself. And the majority of those people do have a local contact that they rely on in some way, shape, or form. We did spend some time, particularly through the working group, trying to understand some of the measures that are already in existence through the likes of VRBO and Airbnb and so on and so forth, to try and help owners manage any negative impacts that a short-term accommodation might have, and dug into those. And there are a number of best management practices. They're not regulations, but they're commitments that owners make when they sign up to these websites to make sure that they're addressing having things like house rules posted in houses, to make sure that their guests are vetted in some way, shape, or form before they come, to try and eliminate problems before they happen. And several of the operators that we've spoken to over the balance of this year do say they take deliberate steps to make sure they understand who's coming to their property, because they don't want their property to be damaged and they don't want to cause disturbance. So there are some steps that operators are already putting into place. We can move on. Now, an even smaller group of people that we heard from were our visitor responses. It was obviously a much harder market to get into. If you're up here on vacation, chances are you're not going to come and spend time with us in Great Roots on a Connect and Collaborate event. Probably not on the top of your list of things to do is to participate in an Engage survey with us either. But we did tap into a few of them. People found it average finding accommodation in the township. And I do want to note there is an error in the report. We do have other accommodation options in the township. So Cobble Beach, I think one of the delegates mentioned earlier on today. There are some motels in there around and about, and we do have two other motels that are in the township. And there are a handful of bed and breakfasts as well that operate in the township. So I think we've got about 12 bed and breakfasts that are currently recognised across the township as well. One of the really interesting things is, and again, very, very small pool of people that we were sampling here, so the numbers are obviously quite skewed, but a large number of people actually suggest that they might come and live here after they've visited. And so there's potential for future tax base out of visitors. Scrolling on. So some of the big things that we've heard as we've come through this from various different places. So there was quite a lot of concern that the municipality shouldn't be offsetting this, and so the cost of us running a program, if we run a program, should be borne by the operators. It should be borne by the industry. It shouldn't be something which taxpayers are helping to fund, and so that enforcement, the costs and the fees associated to running any sort of program should not be ones that fall back to the tax base in the township. Some of the significant issues, and again, the ones that we heard routinely and regularly, were the community disruption, noise, littering, parking, so on and so forth. The idea that we have big parties, disruptive attitudes of short-term accommodations in communities, and so there was some significant concern around those sorts of things. There was quite a lot of support for regulation, licensing, or some sort of a short-term accommodation program that would seek to control and provide additional enforcement measures around this, and that any regulation or licensing program should consider the things such as noise, parking, occupancy, safety standards, so on and so forth. There were concerns around affordability of housing and impact to housing stock in the township. That's one that I think we might be seeing some driftovers from some of the urban municipalities. Certainly, some of the houses that are being used in the township are at the upper end of the sort of $1 million plus houses. So I'm not sure we're taking a huge amount of affordable housing off the marketplace, and certainly our housing stock at the minute. If you look at all the real estate agent signs, we certainly have a comfortable amount of housing stock which is available on the market. So probably not taking that out. We are seeing more than an insignificant number of short-term accommodations are actually currently on the market. And so digging around through this, and again, full disclosure, I stayed in a short-term accommodation when I was on my way into working for the township over the course of last winter. And a lot of the short-term accommodations that were available at that time are houses that are on the market that were bought during COVID that the owners are now trying to get back to the GTA and are looking to sell. So there's actually there's several houses which are currently on the market, several houses that have just come off the market that have been on the market for 6 to 8 to 12 months that are currently being used as short-term accommodations while they're being marketed. If we move on. There was a strong opposition from MatTax, as I say, from the operators, and a concern that overly restricting short-term accommodations would have a negative impact on the tourism industry, and that we would be basically pushing the accommodation part of our tourism benefit out to the neighbouring municipalities, and they would be generating a benefit from that. We skip on. We got some comments. We received a lot of comments. I think we've included the report at the back end of this, and there are pages and pages and pages of comments. And so we just picked out one from each of the 3 groups that we heard from. So we've had some resident feedback, again, reflecting that community impact, the noise, parking, and I think this one really sums up quite significantly. One of the big concerns is it's not necessarily a large party on a Saturday night, which is the issue. It's the fact that there's a group of holiday makers that are on holiday on a Wednesday, living next door to a family who are going to work and going to school on a Thursday morning. And so even if it's not like excessive amounts of noise, that late night pool night with a couple of beers in on a Wednesday evening could be a disturbance for those that are trying to get to work or school the next day. Short-term accommodator feedback, obviously saying this is something they've enjoyed doing. It's been a benefit for them being into the township. It's enabled them to plan for a retirement to the township. It's enabled them to invest in upgrades to a property in the township and provide for others to experience the township. And then the tourist feedback, this one's quite an interesting one. Somebody that discovered us because they used to go to somewhere that's now banned them. They were able to pick up a short-term accommodation. And I think the interesting thing here is that's a family that spent nearly $10,000 on visiting the township. I suspect this is not reflective of every tourist that comes to the township, but certainly it just goes to show how quickly the dollars can add up that coming either directly to the township or into the immediate environment. So again, through the community engagement day, we heard from a diverse group of folks on that. I think there were about 75 folks went through the engage day. Fairly similar themes that bubbled through some of the survey work. So a good conversation around regulation and licensing and what that should do. Some shared concerns around the impacts on residential areas. This is where we really did start to hear, and again, this is something that we did touch on through some of the working group conversations. Really got into is the impact on environment, particularly well water and septic systems. And that was something that came through that Collaborate and Engage Day quite strongly, and something that we've done quite a lot of working on since now. And then also conversation around how important tourism is to the local economy once again. And so wanting to be cautious that any steps we take don't necessarily have adverse negative impacts on jobs and on the economy. Again. So we onboarded a third-party vendor to help us with some of this work, Granicus, this year. Granicus, there's basically 2 third-party vendors that work with most municipalities that are into the short-term accommodation game, Amari and Granicus. We picked to go with Granicus. We have an existing relationship with Granicus. They also do the Bang the Table product. So there's a couple of products that they offer for municipalities, and this is one of them. And what Granicus have done is they started establishing a contact list for short-term accommodation providers. If you go onto a website like AirDNA, which is an analysis website, you can't find individual addresses. And indeed, on Airbnb and VRBO, you don't find addresses. And so what Granicus are able to do is they start pulling that data, and they're actually able to give us addresses and contact details for short-term accommodation providers and hosts, so that we're able to start understanding the market in a much more detailed and nuanced way. So one of the things they were able to tell us is we had about 137 operating at the peak of the season. We're down to about 124 in September, and that goes down to a low point of the mid 80s through the winter. So we do have about 75 to 85 that operate year round, with the numbers at peak come up towards 130 or so during the summer. They gave us a breakdown on the sorts of numbers that we've got. We've got one or two that are quite large. So we do have some short-term accommodations that have very large numbers of bedrooms and can accommodate large numbers of guests. But the majority are for that sort of 5 or less people that's out there at this point in time. We started the work of trying to identify where everybody that owns and operates these live. We haven't got through that entire list just yet. So we know that there's 24 that are out of town. We know that there are folks that live in Owen Sound, folks that live across Grey and Bruce, folks that live in the township. And that 57 is simply because we haven't yet been able to identify exactly where they live and their primary residences. And so we're moving through that 57. As I say, 17 homes being used actively for STAs this year are on the market at the times. We've had 9 STAs voluntarily register. So if you remember rightly, back in June, council endorsed a voluntary registration progress, and we've had 9 that have jumped on board with that. That really was a sign of goodwill. We asked you for $100 and you got nothing in return for it, but we did get 9 that have signed up for it and have been actively leaning in and participating and interested in where this work goes. The map, as you see at the minute, has got red, blue, and orange dots on it. Orange dots are ones that Granicus are still trying to work out whether it's actually a valid short-term accommodation and which property it is. Reds are the ones that they've been able to identify. They're all red because they're non-compliant, and the reason they're non-compliant is because we don't have a program at this point. So that's a tool that would change with compliance. That's why we have none that are green and compliant at this point. And the blue ones they just haven't understood yet how they're operating, and so they haven't assessed their level of compliance. So this is the sort of tool that we would be proposing to use going forward if we did move into a regulatory framework of some sort. We can skip on. So we've had some extraordinarily successful communication efforts this year. I think we tried some new tools and we certainly had some significant success. So our reach through the engagement efforts has been more than 70,000 people have picked up in one way, shape or form or had contact with one of our forms of outreach. So we were running ads on Spotify. We had some targeted and non-targeted social media campaign ads that were running. We did a fair chunk of radio advertising, trying to elicit feedback into the surveys and the programs that we're doing, trying to draw feedback in other ways. We've developed 2 products. So there was a product that went out to short-term accommodation providers. We direct mailed that to them, to about 86 that we were able to identify. That gave them a welcome pack to the township, and embedded in that welcome pack were messages around what some of the bylaws are, what some of the rules are, and what some good behaviours might be to expect of your guests and how you might be able to encourage that. We also did a pamphlet, which was a visitor guide that went out to all kinds of facilities in and around the township for people to hand out. It was in short-term accommodation providers. We got it into other tourism hotspots so that people could pick it up. And that really promoted, as you can see on the back page, the ways in which you can get in touch with us and let us know if you have a concern or a complaint of any sort. So we were taking concerns and complaints by phone, by email, through the Contact GB form, by letter, and any other means that people wanted to reach out to us. So we put out a lot of information encouraging people to get in touch and tell us about their experiences this year. And as I say, their total reach was in excess of 70,000 there. So if we move on. So what did we find? So what did all of that work generate in follow-up? So we received 7 bylaw complaints over the course of this year, and those 7 bylaw complaints related to 4 properties. So we did have multiple complaints on some of the properties. So we had 4 properties, 7 bylaw complaints that we received, and we undertook investigations on. When we undertook the investigations, what that investigation looks like is we went to the property, we visited the property, we spoke to the owner, we spoke to the residents or the tenants that were in the property, we talked to them about the issue. We were able to make contact with most of those within 24 hours of receiving the call. We then spoke to the owner of the property if the owner wasn't there, and we spoke to the neighbouring properties on both sides, and usually went 2 or 3 doors up and down on each side just to try and understand, if this impact was felt by more than one person at the time. On the result of that, what we found was 1 visit was enough in most instances for us to be able to deal with the issue. And indeed, even on the properties where we had multiple complaints, the multiple complaints were different in each one of the complaints that came in. So they weren't a repeat of the same issue that we had been to that property to resolve. So our bylaw work was quite efficient and effective. Out of the 7 complaints we processed for in association with one of the complaints, there were 3 charges that we've laid, which are before the courts at this time. 2 relating to noise. Yeah, 2 relating to noise and 1 under the nuisance bylaw. They were all associated to 1 complaint on 1 property. We also engaged a security company who proactively undertook patrolling. Their patrols were on a Friday night and a Saturday night, and on holiday weekends also on a Sunday night. They made a total of about between 400 and 500 stops in front of a property. And what that proactive looked like was between 9 o'clock in the evening and 2 a.m. in the morning, they would drive to a short-term accommodation that was known to be operating as short-term accommodation. They would park up outside of it. They'd crank the windows down, or they'd get out their vehicle and they'd hang around for 5 or 10 minutes. They might walk up and down the street. What they're looking for is they're observing what's going on in the property. They're looking for evidence of people being in it, looking for evidence of litter or garbage, cars being parked inappropriately, the property being unkempt. They're listening for noise. And noise was one of the big things we were looking for, and listening for noise. Out of those 500 proactive patrols, we found no issues. That covered all of the properties in the township, and we made a specific focus to areas where we've had problems reported either in the past years or over the course of this year. So they were proactive reports, proactive inspections that were undertaken. In addition to that work, we had our own bylaw officer undertake 124 specific visits to property. And so they opened up cases for each one of those visits. And those 124 visits were made, again, to known addresses, particularly ones where we've had perhaps a history in terms of concerns, or where we've heard concerns from members of the public. We targeted those, again, made proactive patrols to observe the property, to look at the property, to listen, to look for garbage, look for litter, look for property standards issues, to look for parking, and to listen for noise. And again, out of those 124, no issues were recorded. In all fairness, we did actually have this private security company contact us once. There was one property that had a very large number of cars parked out the front of it. They were all contained on the parking pad for the property, and they didn't observe any other issues at that point. We did swing by and do a check-in the next day, and were informed that the cars didn't stay overnight. They were there for an evening party and vanished the next day. We received another 21 forms of contact through the Contact GB over and above the ones that we'd received through other places. These weren't complaints. These were residents that were expressing an opinion or a view on the direction we should be going in. And we got some really quite insightful feedback through some of those, through some of those 21 cases that came in through Contact GB. Again, scroll. So really, we did a lot of work looking at the ways in which other people have tackled this. The less popular way that has been picked, and the town of Blue Mountains is a good example of this as a technique, is looking at this through a planning and zoning approach. So a planning and zoning approach really looks at looking at official plan policies that are either restrictive or prohibitive or enabling for short-term accommodations, looking for zoning, which creates areas where short-term accommodations are or are not allowed, and creating zoning conditions around where they could be. The benefit of this is it is forward-looking. It helps build the township towards where we want to be. The challenge of this is it doesn't do anything about what we've got today, because anything in place as of the day you put that zoning bylaw into place is considered a legal non-conforming use, and so it doesn't actually change anything that's there currently. It only changes what will come in the future. And if you look at places like Blue Mountain, where they've used zoning quite restrictively, the town of Blue Mountain has specific zones in the urban areas where you're allowed short-term accommodations, and if you actually look at where they've got them clustered, the town of Blue Mountains now has entire neighborhoods which basically are just short-term accommodations in dense areas. And so learning from the experiences of others, it's definitely a tool which is in the toolkit, but not necessarily one that addresses any challenge you're currently experiencing. It's a management tool for the future and the growth of these sorts of things. The second way in which municipalities have looked at it, and this is the one that more municipalities have jumped on, is looking at the regulatory approach and looking at how bylaws can be used to help provide clarity and guidance around where short-term accommodations are and how they should be managed and how they should be used. These are much more agile and nimble to be able to put into place. They can be changed much more quickly, readily, and in some ways are a much more agile way of managing issues and challenges and concerns. And so there are two different ways in which we've explored being able to do these sorts of things. One of the things that I think we all felt, and certainly our experience through this year has shown, is reliance on the court process right now is challenging. We have a shortage of justice of the peace, JPs, and so court processes are delayed. We're experiencing that in a number of different areas ourselves, as are others. And so dealing with short-term accommodations through a bylaw approach which relies on the court system means it's going to be slow to get through these things. So we are suggesting if we move forward with this, and indeed, regardless of whether we move forward with this, it's probably a worthwhile thing for us to explore, is looking at administrative monetary penalties. And what an administrative monetary penalty basically does is it allows us to establish our own penalty system for various different offences. They could be short-term accommodations, they could be pet bylaw issues, they could be to do with parking and various other things. But administrative monetary penalties allows us to set our own set of fees and schedules and basically take it away from the court. That leads to a far more expedited process. It does lead to the administration of that process falling to us and us having to have the suitable appeal process built in. But AMPs are definitely something that we're considering if we move forward with the regulatory approach to short-term accommodations. Forward. Grey County's been doing a body of work, and indeed we've included that within the package that you have before you tonight. They did some background work in terms of what's happening with short-term accommodations across an area of the province and indeed across Grey County itself. There's a quick summary there. I suppose some updates to this is the draft bylaw in Owen Sound is on its way slowly but surely, bouncing backwards and forwards between council and staff, but is getting there. I believe that the town of Meaford has actually just started its work on short-term accommodations as well. So there is a mixed bag across Grey County with various different people approaching this in various different ways. The one that we quite often talk about, and again already mentioned this evening, is the town of Blue Mountains. It is worth noting they started their work in 2009 on this, and so they are more than a decade now into working through this, 15 years into working through short-term accommodations. They started with the planning and zoning approach, and over the last few years have added to that with the sort of the regulatory approach. So we're one of the ways in which we worked through this to try and test some of these ideas, get some feedback on them, and explore some of the things we'd heard through the public engagement a little bit more, was forming a working group. And the working group was really supposed to be a sounding board for the things we were hearing, to bounce some ideas about and have a really in-depth conversation. It's been a real benefit having the group. There's been a diverse set of opinions and views on that group. Some of the conversations have at times been a little heated, but I'm really pleased to say that group came together in a very respectful way. We did have different views, different opinions on the group, and we were able to talk about those things. Each one of the meetings basically grew from the last one. So an issue that was discussed at one group, one session would be explored and looked into at the next group. And again, Sarah did an immense amount of work doing fact finding between those meetings to inform the conversations. So from those conversations, I think it's fair to say that, when we looked at the data and everything else like that, there doesn't seem to be a huge problem in terms of, every single weekend we've got uncontrolled parties happening across the township, incredible parties going on, parking issues all over the place, and significant problems like that going on in the township. However, the working group did identify some gaps in the market. So a lot of the regulations, a lot of the guidelines that are in place by the VRBOs and the Airbnbs of this world are optional guidelines, and so they do create a playing field which is guided by the operators, not guided by anyone else. So that might mean that you go as a visitor to one short-term accommodation, and you experience smoke detectors and CO2 alarms outside everywhere that they could be, and fire extinguishers and a fire pit that's well managed. And you could go to another one and that not be the case. And the way in which Airbnb and VRBO of these worlds sort of manage that is basically, if you don't perform well, you're going to go to the bottom of the rankings and you won't get bookings. And so there is some logic behind that market-driven economy of scale. But one of the things that through the working group we felt was that really didn't necessarily give our visitors the best experience coming to the township if they were banking on that. So there was a gap there in standardizing some of those visitor experience things that you can get from short-term accommodations. There was also a recognition through the work that the working group was doing that, you know, there are gaps. There are gaps in how we respond to noise, how we respond to parking complaints and concerns. And the operators actually recognize that as well, and would value having some additional tools in their toolkits to help them manage their properties. And so what we were able to find through some of that is some of the concerns that we're hearing from community are actually mirrored by the operators. And so there were some gaps that we needed to explore in there. The other one that came up through these conversations where we are reliant as a township on private servicing, so well water and septic systems, which have potential for impact to human health and have impact to environmental health. And again, something in there about how can we do a good job of managing our environment and making sure our environment is there. So as we went through those conversations and as we went through the engagement activities we did, we've come up with the outline of a regulatory proposal. So what we're suggesting is that we do move into a regulatory environment within the township, and that regulatory environment establishes some common ground rules for short-term accommodations across the township. Some of the things we've got are just up there. So looking to limit the number of commercial operators we have in here, make sure that we've got local contacts for every single short-term accommodation, that we don't see large-scale property management companies coming in, buying up 5, 6, 7 properties and running them as short-term accommodations, that we apply sensible occupancy limits on properties, and we're aware of things like parking and so on and so forth, and that everybody signs up to a good neighbour code of conduct, amongst other things. If we skip on. So this is really what the regulation program we're sort of sketching out before you today has. So $500 for a principal residence, $750 if you're your non-principal residence, and then $200 per additional unit you might have on that property. You can register no more than 2 properties in the township, so no one can register 10 or 15 short-term accommodations. That we've got an ability to revoke licenses and fees if there are persistent problems on a property. We would have appeal processes for the revocation. We'd be implementing an administrative monetary penalty system so that we're able to apply penalties for non-compliance with the township. So if you advertise a short-term accommodation without a license number from us, a registration number from us, there'd be a penalty associated to that. Operating a short-term accommodation without a license would come with a penalty, and so on and so forth. There'd need to be agreed occupancy limits. There'd need to be parking plans so that we know that they can support their occupancy without parking on the streets. Site plans, floor plans, and all those sorts of things. And we would be doing an inspection to follow up to make sure that what they tell us on a piece of paper is what we see when we get out there. We'd be working with fire to make sure that the setbacks to the fire pits were safe and sensible, that the fire extinguishers were installed, that smoke detectors, CO2 detectors, and so on and so forth were in the right places and were there. And that we would be looking at having septic system checks and well water checks just to make sure that visitor safety was accounted for and environmental safety was accounted for in terms of the well water, in terms of the septic systems. Again, if we can skip on. One of the big problems we heard about was noise. And so one of the things we're recommending through this is that if you're going to be a licensed operator in here, you have to have a noise monitoring device. And the intent of a noise monitoring device is not to make it the township's problem, it's to make it the owner's problem. And so one of these things is set up in the house. It gives you an alert on your phone if the noise reaches a certain threshold. And the idea is that because you're aware of that noise, you address that noise long before it becomes a bylaw complaint that we address. But if it does become a bylaw complaint that we get involved in, we're able to see those records and see if the noise was an unsuitable level and use that in terms of processing a fine if needed to. But the idea is that noise aware monitors, and there's a few brands of this that are out there, basically allow the owner of or the operator of the short-term accommodation to become aware there's an issue and manage that issue before it becomes an impact on the residents nearby. And skipping on. So that's where we're at. As I say, huge amount of work, and I know I've probably gone on a little longer than I said I was going to. This was quite a lot to get through. There's still a body of work yet to be done in terms of developing an administrative monetary penalty bylaw, a short-term accommodations bylaw, and transitioning some of our existing bylaws into the AMP framework so that we're able to utilize that appropriately. We think we can get that all done in the first quarter of next year so that we're ready to hit the road for the next season. Based on the numbers that we've got, we reckon we are going to, if we move forward with a regulatory program, we are going to basically price quite a large number of SDAs out of the market. As we've gone through the work, we are aware that quite a number of the 130 or so that we've got are literally people that have a basement apartment that may get used 2 or 3 times a year. They stick it on Airbnb because anyone that comes to Airbnb is easy money. They're not actively seeking to market, and they're not relying on that income because it's give me money that they're not making an investment in a minute. They just take a percentage of the cut. They're not interested in marketing it and making money. This will probably put them off using the fee. These fees are certainly going to be fees which are high enough that they're going to bite into all the operators and be an impact on all the operators. We're also aware that the market is facing natural constriction. So the COVID boom years are now behind us. We've seen constriction in our own market. The data is there to prove that. And the industry are saying that as a result of regulation and changing vacation patterns, the market is constricting as well. So we are expecting that we'll see our market constrict. Based on the examples of others, we're also recognizing that compliance will not happen instantaneously. It will take some time. We've been working a year, and we still have 50-odd property owners there that we don't know where they are yet. We're still having to dig into that a little bit further. So we know that compliance won't come quickly and that there's a body of work to do. So based on that, and based on the program we put in front of council today, we estimate that this generates about $35,000 to $45,000 of revenue every single year to the township. We believe we can run this program for about $40,000. So we think that this program will roughly wash its face, but we do believe it's going to be at least 3 years before it gets to the point of washing its face. And in that first year, just because we've got a lot of setup costs that will be associated to it, it will probably cost a little bit more in this first year than it will do in those subsequent years. But we do believe that over time we can get this program to being kind of revenue neutral in terms of the township. Again, we're not recommending a MAT tax at this point in time, and the reason we're doing that is we have a very low number compared to other municipalities, a very low number of overnight options, and so the revenue that would be generated from that will be relatively small. It will be relatively small both for the municipality, and it will be relatively small for our third-party vendor who has to spend the tourism dollars. We can't spend those tourism dollars. They have to go to a non-profit body to spend on our behalf. They need the township's economic development strategy, which we don't yet have. They also need the township's tourism strategy, or they need to develop it, which we don't yet have. And so we're really not in a position yet to be able to implement a MAT tax. The other thing that's come out from a number of the municipalities we've spoken to, they've said, don't do the two together, because the two together are confusing for everyone. Nobody really knows what's going on. Administratively, it becomes very complicated for the townships that have done it. And that really is where we're at. I hope I've done justice to the team that's put this work together over the course of the summer, and justice to the more than 600 members of the community that have participated and provided feedback. This is obviously a subject which is close and near and dear to many people's hearts, but that's where we've landed on at this point. Thank you very much, and I'll be more than willing to take any questions.
Thanks for that, Niall. Yeah, it's a great presentation there, and definitely a lot of information and a lot of time spent by staff doing this too. So it was very, very well put out there. Open up to councillors here now for questions.
So one of the comments you made earlier on was about noise complaints happening during the week, but we were actually going out and monitoring Friday, Saturday, Sunday type things. So what happened on those ones that had an issue with somebody in their neighborhood on a Wednesday night or a Thursday night?
Yeah, so through you, Deputy Mayor Pringle, to Mayor Carlton. So we would respond to any complaint that came in. And so we didn't get complaints of noise during the midweek. That was something that came through the surveys. We weren't proactively monitoring for that, though, this time round. Our focus, and again, looking at both the tourism data and the use data, the short-term accommodations, the peak use is people coming on a Friday, staying through to the Sunday evening. That's when the peak of the market was, and we definitely did have boots on the ground at that point in time. One of the things I perhaps didn't talk about that we would be suggesting implementing if we move forward with the regulation is making sure that we have a 24-hour on-call system that would be in place and would elicit a response if a response was needed 7 days a week.
That follow up?
So that maybe answers my next question then about one of the comments that I have heard from residents is about people staying at these short-term accommodations trespassing onto the neighbor's property. And how do the neighbors deal with that? Because in some cases, I think they actually feel quite intimidated and feel that if they complain, then they're going to be targeted. So, and targeted by the people that are there visiting. So maybe you've just kind of answered how that gets taken care of.
Yep. Through you, Deputy Mayor Pringle, Mayor Carlton, I'd encourage anyone that has a concern regarding the use of a neighbouring property, whether that's a short-term accommodation or not, to reach out to township staff and see how we might be able to help manage those issues. In many cases, that may not be deliberate intention. Many of us don't have fences. I don't have a fence in my backyard, and I know many members of community don't have fences. Some of us have bush in the back of our properties, and it might not be clear exactly where lines are, and so on and so forth. So we always, I suppose I always like to, not we always, I always like to urge on the fact that that would be accidental rather than deliberate. And so us turning up and having a conversation with somebody and saying, look, by the way, you wandered into somebody's backyard next door, would be met with, oh, I'm sorry, in the first instance. And I suspect in most instances, dealing with it in that sort of a light is the way in which we would find success. And so certainly that was borne out through the 7 complaints. Again, not a massive sample size, but in the 7 complaints that we did have this time, we spoke with both property owners and residents, tenants that were in a short-term accommodation. And we found very high levels of compliance. One of the complaints related to a group that was having a barbecue lunch, and it was a midweek complaint. It was a Tuesday or Wednesday. They were having a barbecue lunch outside next to the pool. The neighbor that had reached out to us was somebody that was working from home in their basement, and it was a summer, so they had their window open. The music they were playing had a bass, and the music wasn't at an excessive volume, but that bass definitely could carry. When we had a conversation with that group that were around the pool, they were very, very happy to turn the music down. We swung round that property 2 times that afternoon. The music had been kept down all day, so that complaint didn't resurface that day. And so we found through the limited contacts we've had that people that are staying in these are actually really responsive when we do talk to them. And so I'd encourage any member of the public that has a concern about those sorts of things, feel free to reach out to us. And whether we can deal with it right there and then, or whether we deal with it the next day, we find that the response has been very good. And if it is a really acute problem that needs an immediate response through the regulation program, the intent would be to have the ability to have that 24-hour human response able to make a visit.
Questions? Council Winters.
Thank you. And I think we should commend the current operators we have. I mean, this was an encouraging report that they exist and there isn't a whole lot of issues going on right at the moment. We do need to address it moving forward. And if you don't control it, it will get out of control, especially when all our neighboring municipalities are licensing it. It'll drive them into Georgian Bluffs. One of the topics that we mentioned back in the day was, did you get any response about it capping a number of STAs in the municipality? We talked about that. I mean, you can limit 2 per individual, but I mean, how many can we have? Are we going to checkerboard the municipality? And again, it does affect housing supply for younger families. Just wondering if that came up in any of the comments.
So through you, Deputy Mayor Pringle, Councillor Winters, yes, it did. We did have some conversations around, capping in various different ways. Based on the work we've done with neighbouring municipalities, and again, we're all unique, so it's always a bit difficult when you look at a neighbouring municipality and try to draw some conclusion as to how we are here. Is we have quite a low number of short-term accommodations at this point in time. So based on the spread of them and the mix of accommodation types we've got at this point, as I said earlier, they are in every community. We have no community that seems to have a major cluster where there's like part of a street which is nothing but short-term accommodations. They blend in much of the community. They're interspersed with seasonal cottages and seasonal homes, and so they might not look any different from the house that's next door that's not an STA because it's a seasonal residence as well. So at this point, although we have had conversations around capping, it's not something that we've explored to any great detail. It would definitely be something, though, that we would want to keep an active eye on if we were to move through a regulation, and certainly something I think we would all be open to reinvestigating if we did start to see a trend of these starting to cluster or have a significantly impactful impact on an individual community or an individual neighborhood. But at this point in time, what we've discovered is there's probably more than people think they are. You know, where I live, I knew there was one down the road. I hadn't realized that I had almost 10 of them within 250 or 300 meters of my house. And so, you know, I think most of us probably live closer to one than we think we do. And it's not necessarily having a significant impact at this point in time in terms of that community construct, but definitely something we have heard, definitely something we would want to keep a very close eye on as we move forward, particularly if we have a regulation which would allow us to have that option onto it. I think the other thing is we are looking at the official plan, and the official plan is going to contain some policy context around this sort of stuff. And so I think we are building the tools in the background which would allow us to more proactively manage that on a go forward basis. The last thing I'd say is it does look like our market's constricting, not growing. And so, you know, our peak figures over the last couple of years were up toward 180. So we've probably lost in the order of about 50 of these operating over the course of the summer. We've definitely seen a much harder year for them this year. Our bylaw officer, who is out and about on a fairly routine, regular basis, has definitely reported that the township was quieter this year than it has been for the certainly last summer. And so, you know, I don't know whether I could say that we're over the hump of the issue and we're on a bit of a downside, but I think that the signs at this point would indicate that's something to watch, perhaps not something that we can take action on just yet.
Well, thank you. And then that addresses my question, my concern there. The one thing I did note, and I find it humorous with my background, is when they start advertising that they can handle 15 to 20 people, keep in mind the septic system assumes 2 people per bedroom. And I know we don't have a lot of 10 and 15 bedroom houses out there. So we do have overpopulation, which is a huge issue, and we need to look after that, right?
So thank you for the question through you, Deputy Mayor Pringle. A great takeaway. So actually 1 or 2 of the houses that do attract the complaints are the big houses. And the interesting thing is, and I didn't fully appreciate this, we do have some 12 and 14 bedroom houses in the township which are operated as short-term accommodations. And so the occupancy limit that we're recommending is the Ontario Building Code, 2 per bedroom plus 2 floaters. And that's what we'd be expecting the operators to put forward. Based on our external observations of some of the larger houses, that might well restrict 1 or 2 of them. The theory is, and again, all of those are fairly new houses, so they should have septic systems that were built to the capacity of that as designed house. But certainly when we get into the inspection on some of these, we are expecting 1 or 2 of them, we might have some questions about whether or not that was actually built as a bedroom in the first place or not.
Follow up? I would assume you're going to find that they were not. I do a lot of septic work in the municipality and different municipalities, and those houses are very few and far between that have bedroom capacities like that. But no, thank you.
Councillor Day.
Have any first, thank you. That was a lot of work for the staff and yourself to take on, and I really appreciate the community as well, all the volunteers who sat on that committee. That was thoughtful, diligent, deep approach to an important issue in the community. And secondly, are there any privacy issues that have come forward with the noise monitoring systems?
So through your Deputy Mayor Pringle to Councillor Day, no is the short answer to that. It's a fairly new piece of technology. Town of Blue Mountains has implemented it over the last couple of years, and it's quite widely now being used across the US and indeed across Canada. I think through the conversations we've had, we would not have access to any data unless the owner operator provided it for us. So it's not like the Noise Aware would be providing us an update. It is a piece of software. It's a piece of detection equipment that's between the property owner and who they give access to. So their property manager, if it's not them, or the owner themselves. So they would get those alerts. We would not. We would be relying still on a complaint driven before we got involved. Part of the agreement that we would be forming through the regulation would allow us the ability to ask for and not be reasonably rejected from having it. If we were to just ask for it on a carte blanche basis, I think that's pretty reasonable grounds for us to be said, no, you can't get it. But if we were saying we're investing a noise complaint, can you show us your evidence to show whether you did or you didn't have a noise? That's the time where we would be using that. But it would be a piece of technology that would be at the control and the use of the short-term accommodation owner.
just to clarify, they measure decibels only. They don't record conversations or words spoken.
Yeah, so there's two that I've done some looking into, and they're looking for peak noise. So you set a threshold, and they're looking for peak noise. It's peak noise load either inside or outside, and yep, it's not recording. It's just graphing that peak noise. That's probably something I want to do a little bit more digging into, because I think we all heard that Amazon Echo didn't be very careful, that certain speakers didn't record what we were saying, but they may do. So I think that's something that we can look into.
And are these for indoor usage only, since many of our noise complaints are for backyard parties in the summer?
So through you, Deputy Mayor Pringle, they work both. So there are systems that have both an indoor and an outdoor module. There are systems on the indoor which, through your placement, you put them somewhere where they can, they'll be facing the backyard or something like that, and they would be able to pick up the backyard as well. But there are systems that have both indoor and outdoor options.
Thank you.
Mayor Carlton.
I now have 2 comments and then a question from a resident. On the decibel meters, I know from when my husband just over 3 years ago was working for a place in the municipality of Meaford, their main concern with that decimeter was outside noise. They weren't as concerned with the noise inside the house, but what came outside. And if it reached a certain level outside, that's when the alert went out for somebody to go out and just ask them to keep it down. Another comment would be about the zoning versus bylaw. And at Roma Conference last January, one of the speakers suggested that zoning was harder to change. So if you zoned a property to be a short-term accommodation, you might have a really good owner this time, but they sell, the next owner comes in and they don't care, and now it's zoned that way and you can't change it. And the suggestion was to do everything by bylaw and regulate it that way, because it's much easier for a municipality to change the regulations surrounding that property by bylaw. And the last item I have is one that I got from a resident asking, why is the township staff recommending these additional fees and licensing on short-term accommodations when the data in the report clearly shows that short-term accommodations in the townships are not a concern or a problem?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's a good question. So I think I'll speak to the second comment you made while I'm formulating an answer to the good question. So yes, and I think one of the things that we're proposing with the regulation system is it would not transition with an owner. So if you operated a property as a short-term accommodation now, and you've sold your property, the new owner, a real estate agent, could not list it as a viable short-term accommodation, because you go back to square one. You need to apply for your license and regulation and everything else like that as a new owner. Why are we recommending implementing something if we don't have the evidence to show it's there? I think so politics plays a large part of this. So I think if we look at the landscape in Ontario, look at the landscape of neighbouring municipalities, politically, taking action on short-term accommodations is something that we've seen roll out across multiple jurisdictions. We see the federal government and provincial government talking about the potential for regulation, and so there is politically a very large movement towards regulation and license, and so there is a political pressure for us to move in that direction, despite the data that we've not found rather than found. So I think politically would be one. The second one is, although we haven't found any evidence to support and back up the community feedback we've had, it's undeniable that we've had very strong community feedback, and so in some ways, it doesn't really matter if there is a problem or if there isn't a problem. If there's a perceived problem, there's a problem. And so, the reality here is there might not be a problem that needs to be fixed right now, but community believes there's a problem that needs to be fixed right now, and we're driven by community. So I think politically and community expectation have certainly influenced the recommendations that are before you this evening. I think if I then strip it down and I actually look at, actual practical reasons why we're making the recommendations we are, some of the really good conversations we had really did get down to wells and septic systems. And these are systems which we are very reliant on in the township, and people are concerned about their use and potential misuse. And so I think with changing climate patterns and an area which we know tourists value for their environmental credentials, and the fact that the visitors that are coming here are probably coming from areas with municipal wells, municipal sewers, and we all know that that takes a little bit of a change in mindset and change in attitude when you come up. You have to think a little bit before you flush. I think that we want to make sure that we're doing our best to protect the environment. The other one that resonated for me was through some of the working group conversations, the idea that our vendors are looking for a level playing field. They're actually would be quite happy if some of the less good operators, the ones that do allow noisy parties, the ones that do allow garbage to be left outside, the ones that do allow for less desirable parking behaviors, they'd actually be quite happy to see those operators not in the marketplace. And so, yes, I don't think the evidence suggests we need this now, but I think that the evidence that we've seen suggests that it wouldn't be harmful to put it into place in terms of looking after the environment. The other thing that factors into the back of my head is that, although the marketplace, the industry seems to be on the decline just now, there's nothing to say it won't go up again in another couple of years. And having this in place means that if this does become a problem in another few years, we actually have all the tools in place at that point ready to manage it. So, yes, I think it's an extraordinarily valid question for us to consider. Based on what we've found this year, through all the proactive work we've done, we really didn't find a problem. Didn't find we were inundated with phone calls, and we did everything we could to encourage everyone. We actually went out and did proactive work, which is something this township has never done in a bylaw sense. We went looking for problems. We didn't find problems. So it certainly should be something we factor into the back of our heads as we go more forward. We didn't see problems, and we are recommending taking action almost contrary to the evidence that we found. But I think that there is good merit for thinking of taking that next step based on what we see in the landscape around us and based on the community concern. And again, recognizing that the perception does have an impact on communities' lives.
Thanks for that. No, further? Oh, yeah, go ahead, Hallie.
Thank you, and through you, Deputy Mayor. I guess with my sort of economic development and tourism hat on, one thing that I just wanted to add is the real benefit of a registration program from that perspective is it gives us a great touch point with these accommodations and with the tourists who are coming into our community. And hopefully through the registration program, we can also provide some value added back to help support those operators, to help enhance, the tourism, the way that they attract their visitors to their accommodations, how they market themselves so that they can provide the best visitor experience possible. And so I think from that economic development and tourism perspective, having that active touch point with our accommodation operators is going to prove to be valuable.
Great point, sir. Carlton.
Thank you. This will be my final. Thank you, Haley, for that. I think that's valid information. And thank you, Niall, for your answer. And I apologize for dumping that question on you like that. And I would like to thank staff for all the work that you've done in this, because that was a lot of reading and a lot of information and very good information. So thank you very much.
Any further? I just think for myself on that, to go through this process to the extent that we have a do nothing attitude at the end of it would be complete reversals of the direction we really want to go. We want to be proactive in what we're doing. And I commend you for all the work you've done. I think it's a small price to pay to have a registration fee or whatever that may be, whatever that price is, to move this forward and put people on the same page. So I'm in agreement that to do nothing we're just going to start over. We're past that. So great job. I thought it was great. I did want to put a shout out to our bylaw officer who's here tonight, Brian Paulus. I give you 100% kudos for what you do every day. Because when you're rolling up on these people and they don't know you're coming, I can imagine most times isn't the greatest visit. So And kudos to you, Brian, for doing what you do every day. All right. No further comments? All right, we have a mover and a seconder. We had our discussion. I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? It's carried. All right, unfinished business, nil. New business is nil. Notice of motion. Anyone got a notice of motion? Eric Dalton.
Thank you. I have one that I have forwarded the information to staff already, so it will be on next week's agenda. It's renewing the Ontario Invasive Species Strategic Plan, and I forwarded this to Grey Saba Conservation Authority as well. And it's an opportunity to comment on what the strategic plan from 2012, how it should be address the ongoing and increasing threat of invasive species in Ontario. So consultation closes on January 4th, so comments can be submitted until then. And I think that's a valuable one for us all to be commenting on to deal with invasive species. So that will be on next week's agenda.
Thank you for that. Any further? Not seeing any. Closed sessions, we have nil. Date of the next regular meeting. Special Counsel CAO Recruitment, December 11th, 2023 at 4 p.m. Council, December 13th, 2023 at 5 p.m. If there is no further business, I will now call for an adjournment of the meeting. Need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Schultheis, Councillor Winters. Any discussion? I'll call the vote. All those in favor. We are adjourned. Thank you.